The crisp morning air of our quiet Ohio suburb offered no comfort as I stood frozen at the teller window of the local bank. My name is Sarah, and at 34 years old, I had mastered the art of making myself invisible so my husband could shine. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a dull hum, mirroring the anxiety vibrating in my chest. I stared at the digital display on the debit machine, my heart sinking as the numbers confirmed what I already knew. I was transferring $3,000, the very last cent of my personal savings, to cover yet another bounce check written by my husband, Bradley. The bank teller gave me a look of quiet sympathy that I could barely stomach. She processed the transfer in a heavy silence, printed the receipt, and gently handed it to me. I offered her a fragile smile, took the thin slip of paper, and walked out into the glaring morning sunlight. Every step toward the parking lot felt heavier than the last. For 8 long years, I had played the role of the devoted, sacrificing wife. I was a humble bookkeeper at our local community church, earning a modest salary that I meticulously stretched to cover our daily expenses. I drove a 10-year-old sedan that rattled ominously, and my wardrobe consisted entirely of carefully mended, thrifted clothes. I slid into the driver's seat of my weathered car and gripped the steering wheel. I sacrificed my own comfort and financial security to maintain the flawless illusion of Bradley's success. At 36, Bradley was an aggressively flashy real estate agent. He lived and breathed for the chase, always pursuing that elusive $1 million commission that was supposedly right around the corner. To the outside world, he was a titan of industry. He wore custom-tailored suits, drove a leased luxury SUV that we could not afford, and treated prospective clients to lavish steakhouse dinners on credit cards, maxed out to the absolute limit. I was the invisible foundation holding up his towering house of cards. Whenever a credit card company called with collection threats, I negotiated the payment plan. Whenever a check bounced, I drained my own meager accounts to save his professional reputation. I believed in him. I loved him with a blind, desperate loyalty, convinced that my unwavering support was the unbreakable bedrock of our marriage. I told myself that once he finally landed that massive deal, he would turn to me and thank me for believing in him when no one else did. I thought my quiet, endless sacrifices were building our shared future. When I pulled into our garage, the heavy silence of the house settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I expected Bradley to be relieved. I expected a gentle apology or perhaps a simple acknowledgement that I had just rescued him from a humiliating financial disaster. Instead, the moment I unlocked the front door and stepped into the living room, a wave of pure, unadulterated hostility hit me. Bradley was pacing furiously across our hardwood floor. His silk tie was loosened, his face flushed with a dark, simmering rage. He did not greet me. He locked his furious eyes on me and unleashed a torrent of anger that left me entirely paralyzed. "You transferred $3,000, he snapped, his voice echoing sharply against the high-vaulted ceilings. $3,000. Sarah, what is that supposed to do? That barely covers the catering deposit for the open house, let alone what I actually need to stay in the game." I stood near the entryway, my purse still clutched tightly in my hands. "Bradley, that was everything I had left," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I emptied my savings. The check cleared. The account is no longer overdrawn. You are safe." "Safe?" He let out a harsh, mocking laugh that cut straight through my chest. "I am trying to build an empire, and you are talking to me about being safe. I need $10,000 by tomorrow morning." $10,000? There is an exclusive networking retreat in Miami this weekend. The biggest commercial developers in the entire country are going to be there. If I am not on that flight, I lose the chance to pitch the waterfront project. I lose everything. I stared at him, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of his demand. My mind raced frantically, calculating numbers that simply did not exist. "Bradley, we do not have $10,000, I said, taking a cautious step forward. "Your credit cards are declined. The home equity line is maxed out. My savings are gone. We are out of money. You cannot go to Miami." His face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly contempt. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, towering over me. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering maliciously on my faded cardigan and my sensible scuffed shoes. The disgust in his gaze was so palpable, it felt like a physical blow. "Do not tell me what I cannot do," he sneered, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You have absolutely no idea how the real world works. You sit in your little church office pushing pencils for pennies thinking you understand business. My career is the only thing keeping us afloat. Your pathetic little church job is nothing but a charity hobby. It is pennies, Sarah. Pennies. You need to figure this out and find me that money, or you're going to drag us both down to your miserable level." The silence that followed his outburst was deafening. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the crushing toxicity of his ungratefulness. For 8 years, I had absorbed his stress. I had forgiven his financial recklessness, believing it was the unfortunate price of ambition. But in that exact moment, looking up at the man I had given my entire youth to, something inside me irrevocably snapped. I did not cry. The tears that usually sprang to my eyes during our arguments were completely gone. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. I realized with terrifying certainty that I was not a partner in this marriage. I was a resource, and my husband was completely willing to bleed me dry and leave me with absolutely nothing. The crisp morning air felt sharp against my face as I stood frozen at the teller window of the local bank in our quiet Ohio suburb. My name is Sarah, and at 34 years old, I had mastered the invisible art of holding my husband's chaotic world together. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a dull, indifferent hum, mirroring the anxiety vibrating in my chest. I stared at the digital display on the debit machine, my heart sinking as the numbers confirmed what I already knew. I was transferring $3,000, the very last cent of my personal savings, to cover yet another bounce check written by my husband Bradley. The bank teller gave me a look of quiet sympathy that I could barely stomach. She processed the transfer and, in a heavy silence, printed the receipt and gently handed it to me. I offered her a fragile smile, took the thin slip of paper, and walked out into the glaring morning sunlight. Every step toward the parking lot felt heavier than the last. For 8 long years, I had played the role of the devoted, sacrificing wife. I was a humble bookkeeper at our local community church, earning a modest salary that I meticulously stretched to cover our daily expenses. I drove a 10-year-old sedan that rattled ominously, and my wardrobe consisted entirely of carefully mended, thrifted clothes. I slid into the driver's seat of my weathered car and gripped the steering wheel. I sacrificed my own comfort and financial security to maintain the flawless illusion of Bradley's success. At 36, Bradley was an aggressively flashy real estate agent. He lived and breathed for the chase, always pursuing that elusive $1 million commission that was supposedly right around the corner. To the outside world, he was a titan of industry. He wore custom-tailored suits, drove a leased luxury SUV that we could not afford, and treated prospective clients to lavish steakhouse dinners on credit cards maxed out to the absolute limit. I was the invisible foundation holding up his towering house of cards. Whenever a credit card company called with collection threats, I negotiated the payment plan. Whenever a check bounced, I drained my own meager accounts to save his professional reputation. I believed in him. I loved him with a blind, desperate loyalty, convinced that my unwavering support was the unbreakable bedrock of our marriage. I told myself that once he finally landed that massive deal, he would turn to me and thank me for believing in him when no one else did. I thought my quiet, endless sacrifices were building our shared future. When I pulled into our garage, the heavy silence of the house settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I expected Bradley to be relieved. I expected a gentle apology or perhaps a simple acknowledgement that I had just rescued him from a humiliating financial disaster. Instead, the moment I unlocked the front door and stepped into the living room, a wave of pure, unadulterated hostility hit me. Bradley was pacing furiously across our hardwood floor. His silk tie was loosened, his face flushed with a dark, simmering rage. He did not greet me. He locked his furious eyes on me and unleashed a torrent of anger that left me entirely paralyzed. "You transferred $3,000, he snapped, his voice echoing sharply against the high-vaulted ceilings. $3,000. Sarah, what is that supposed to do? That barely covers the catering deposit for the open house, let alone what I actually need to stay in the game." I stood near the entryway, my purse still clutched tightly in my hands. "Bradley, that was everything I had left," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I emptied my savings. The check cleared. The account is no longer overdrawn. You are safe." "Safe?" He let out a harsh, mocking laugh that cut straight through my chest. "I am trying to build an empire, and you are talking to me about being safe. I need $10,000 by tomorrow morning." $10,000. There is an exclusive networking retreat in Miami this weekend. The biggest commercial developers in the entire country are going to be there. If I am not on that flight, I lose the chance to pitch the waterfront project. I lose everything. I stared at him, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of his demand. My mind raced frantically, calculating numbers that simply did not exist. Bradley, we do not have $10,000, I said, taking a cautious step forward. Your credit cards are declined. The home equity line is maxed out. My savings are gone. We are out of money. You cannot go to Miami. His face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly contempt. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, towering over me. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering maliciously on my faded cardigan and my sensible, scuffed shoes. The disgust in his gaze was so palpable, it felt like a physical blow. Do not tell me what I cannot do, he sneered, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. You have absolutely no idea how the real world works. You sit in your little church office pushing pencils for pennies thinking you understand business. My career is the only thing keeping us afloat. Your pathetic little church job is nothing but a charity hobby. It is pennies, Sarah. Pennies. You need to figure this out and find me that money, or you are going to drag us both down to your miserable level. The door slammed so hard, the pictures on the wall rattled, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of our living room. Bradley had stormed out, likely to smooth-talk another investor or drown his anger at a high-end bar. I stood there for a long time, the echo of his cruel words, pennies, Sarah, pennies, ringing in my ears. I forced myself to move, seeking the mundane comfort of chores to steady my racing mind. I grabbed his laundry basket filled with the expensive golf pants and silk shirts I meticulously maintained and headed to the laundry room. As I emptied the pockets of a pair of tailored slacks, my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. It wasn't uncommon to find dry cleaning tickets or valet stubs, but this felt different. I smoothed it out on the washing machine, my eyes scanning the faded ink. It was a receipt from a high-end jeweler downtown dated just 2 days ago. The total charge was $4,500 for a diamond tennis bracelet. A cold numbness began to spread through my chest. I had never received a diamond tennis bracelet. The most recent gift Bradley had given me was a blender for my birthday, accompanied by a lecture on how much money we could save if I made my own smoothies. $4,500. While I was transferring my last $3,000 to save his sinking ship, he was dropping more than that on diamonds. The numbness gave way to a sharp, sickening suspicion. I remembered he had left his iPad charging on his nightstand in a rush. I hurried upstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew his passcode. It was the date he closed his first big real estate deal. I unlocked the screen and immediately opened his messages, which were synced to his phone. I scrolled through the usual professional chatter until a notification popped up at the top of the screen. It was from a contact saved simply as Title Company, but the message preview didn't read like a property closing update. I tapped it, my hands trembling. Can't wait to wear it tonight in Miami, baby. The words hit me like a physical blow. Miami, the networking retreat, the $10,000 he desperately needed, the diamond tennis bracelet. It all clicked into place with terrifying clarity. He wasn't going to Miami to pitch a waterfront project. He was going to flaunt his fake wealth with his mistress. He was trying to fund his affair with the money he demanded from me. The immediate, visceral sting of betrayal settled deep in my bones. I stared at the screen, expecting the tears to come, expecting the familiar wave of heartbreak that usually accompanied our arguments. But the tears never arrived. Instead, the emotional fog that had clouded my judgment for 8 years instantly lifted. I didn't cry. My accountant instincts, honed by years of finding discrepancies in ledgers and balancing impossible budgets, took over with ruthless efficiency. The emotional wife was gone. The forensic auditor had arrived. I needed proof, and I needed to protect myself before he drained me completely. I grabbed my phone, took clear, undeniable photos of the receipt and the text messages, and began to formulate a plan. The illusion was shattered, and it was time to calculate the true cost of my marriage. The tracking app on my phone showed a blinking blue dot perfectly aligned with the Oakmont Valley Country Club. I parked my 10-year-old sedan behind a row of towering hedges far away from the gleaming Mercedes and Porsches lining the valet circle. The midday sun beat down on the asphalt, but I felt nothing but a cold, singular focus. Bradley was supposed to be in Miami. He had looked me right in the eye, demanded $10,000 for an emergency business retreat, and stormed out in a furious rage. Yet here he was, barely 3 miles from our house, relaxing at the most exclusive club in the county. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. A part of me still wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. Perhaps he was meeting a local investor before his flight. But the image of that crumpled jewelry receipt and the text message about a diamond tennis bracelet burned brightly in my mind. I stepped out of the car, smoothing down my faded, thrifted skirt, and made my way toward the service entrance. I knew the layout of Oakmont Valley well enough. My church often hosted its annual charity luncheons in the secondary banquet hall, and as the humble bookkeeper, I was always the one hauling boxes of programs through the kitchen loading dock. I slipped past a delivery truck and navigated the tiled corridors, smelling of roasted garlic and expensive floor wax. The ambient noise of clinking crystal and soft jazz grew louder as I approached the main dining terrace. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, heavy rhythm. I stayed close to the wall, peeking around a massive mahogany pillar, decorated with lush, cascading floral arrangements. The terrace was bathed in golden sunlight, filled with affluent members, sipping mimosas and laughing softly. I scanned the sea of perfectly styled hair and tailored suits. Then I saw him. Bradley was sitting at a prime corner table overlooking the manicured golf course. He was wearing a crisp linen shirt, looking completely relaxed, without a single trace of the desperate, angry man who had screamed at me hours earlier. But he was not alone. Sitting close beside him, her hand resting intimately on his thigh, was Chloe. She was 24, a junior realtor at his brokerage, with long blonde hair and a designer dress that cost more than I made in 2 months. And glinting on her wrist, catching the sunlight in a blinding display of stolen wealth, was the $4,500 diamond tennis bracelet. The feeling of betrayal, of being utterly played, rose in my throat like bitter bile. Seeing my husband with his mistress was a devastating blow, but the true nightmare sat directly across the table from them. Brenda, my mother-in-law. Brenda was a prominent, highly respected figure at our community church. She sat on the parish council, led the Sunday school committee, and constantly lectured me on the biblical duties of a humble, submissive wife. For 8 years, she had criticized my cooking, belittled my modest background, and demanded absolute perfection from me to support her precious son. I had cooked her holiday meals, driven her to doctor's appointments, and absorbed her passive-aggressive insults with a gracious smile, believing we were family. Yet here she was sipping a mimosa, laughing warmly with the woman sleeping with her married son. I pressed myself tightly against the floral partition, practically holding my breath as I pulled out my phone and hit record. The camera lens peeked through the broad green leaves of a potted palm, capturing the three of them perfectly. Brenda leaned forward, placing her manicured hand over Chloe's. Her voice, usually so pious and stern at church, was now dripping with conspiratorial affection. Bradley will drop Sarah as soon as she co-signs the new loan to clear his IRS debt, Brenda said, laughing a cruel, dismissive laugh. She's just a naive church mouse. She will sign whatever he puts in front of her because she thinks she's saving his career. Chloe giggled, a high-pitched grating sound that made my stomach churn. She leaned her head on Bradley's shoulder, batting her eyelashes. Bradley kissed Chloe's temple, his eyes gleaming with a predatory arrogance. "Do not worry, baby," he promised, his voice captured clearly by my phone's microphone. "Once the papers are signed, she will be on the street. She will die broke. We just need to keep up the act for a few more days until the bank approves the home equity line of credit. Then this whole miserable marriage is over, and I am all yours." He raised his champagne flute, and the three of them clinked their glasses in a twisted celebratory toast to my absolute financial and emotional ruin. I stopped the recording. Every word they spoke was like a red-hot iron needle piercing my heart. I had given them my youth, my unwavering loyalty, and every last penny of my savings. They were not just having an affair. They were actively plotting a financial execution. They intended to use my pristine credit to absorb Bradley's massive tax debts, drain the equity from the home my parents left me, and toss me aside with nothing. The shock was like a bucket of ice water thrown in my face, but the chilling temperature of that realization brought a sudden absolute clarity. I did not drop to my knees. I did not burst onto the terrace to scream or throw a glass of wine in their faces. I simply saved the video file, backed it up to a secure cloud server, and slipped away through the service corridor as silently as a ghost. The naive church mouse was dead. In her place, a forensic accountant was born, and I was about to audit their entire miserable lives. I did not turn back. I backed away from the floral partition, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the polished terrace tiles. The laughter of my husband, my mother-in-law, and that wretched 24-year-old mistress faded, replaced by the heavy thudding of my own pulse. I navigated the service corridors of the country club like a ghost exiting through the loading dock. The midday sun was blinding, reflecting off the hot asphalt. I reached my 10-year-old sedan and slid into the suffocating heat of the driver's seat. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands remarkably steady, for a woman whose existence was just summarized as a disposable joke. They thought I was a naive church mouse. They believed I was a simple, submissive bookkeeper who would blindly sign a fraudulent loan and quietly march to my financial slaughter. I started the engine, the familiar rattle of the old car grounding me in reality. As I pulled out onto the main road, the emotional fog that had clouded my judgment completely evaporated. For 8 years, I allowed Bradley's financial tornadoes to dictate my life. I played the role of the humble, sacrificing wife because I believed marriage required it. I wore thrifted cardigans and packed my lunches while my husband leased a luxury SUV and bought diamonds for a junior realtor. But the woman driving away from the country club was no longer that pathetic, weeping martyr. A cold, surgical precision took over my mind. Bradley thought he knew exactly who I was. He thought my highest achievement was balancing the petty cash drawer for the Sunday school bake sale. He was tragically mistaken. I did not go back to our house. That place was no longer a home, it was a crime scene. I drove straight to the community church and locked myself inside my cramped, windowless basement office. The walls were lined with filing cabinets filled with donation receipts. This tiny room was the physical manifestation of the $35,000 salary Bradley mocked so mercilessly. It was the perfect cover. I sat at my battered metal desk and reached underneath, feeling for the false bottom of the middle drawer. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled out a sleek, encrypted laptop, a device completely detached from our home network and from Bradley's prying eyes. 3 years ago, the exhaustion of bailing Bradley out of debt had broken something inside me. Giving him my modest savings was like pouring water into a bottomless black hole. I needed a safety net he could not touch. I was a certified public accountant with a mind wired for spotting numerical anomalies. While Bradley chased fake $1 million commissions, I created a shadow limited liability company. I offered my services as an elite freelance forensic accountant, specializing in corporate mergers and acquisitions, operating under strict non-disclosure agreements. I became the ghost auditor for some of the largest private equity firms in the country. I untangled webs of corporate fraud that took teams of lawyers months to discover. I was brilliant at it, and the market compensated me accordingly. I opened the laptop and bypassed the church router, connecting to my secure virtual private network. I entered my complex passwords, went through 2 layers of biometric authentication, and accessed my offshore portal. The screen loaded, displaying the stark minimalist interface of my corporate banking dashboard. I had just closed 3 massive, highly sensitive corporate audits this year alone. Each contract had been negotiated fiercely and executed with flawless precision. I navigated to the account summary tab and hit refresh. The bold black numbers appeared on the screen, staring back at me in silent triumph. $740,500. My checking account balance was nearly $750,000. I stared at the screen, letting the magnitude of that wealth wash over me. Bradley had screamed at me this morning over $10,000. He had called my income pennies. He and his vile mother were plotting to trick me into a home equity line of credit to clear his tax debts. They thought they were going to throw a penniless woman out onto the street. They had no idea that the woman they were mocking was out earning Bradley's entire brokerage by an astronomical margin. I possessed the ultimate financial armor. But the wave of triumphant satisfaction was instantly followed by a chilling realization. I was wealthy, yes, but I was still legally married to a parasite. In our state, marital assets were subject to equitable distribution. If Bradley ambushed me with divorce papers before I was ready, the law could entitle him to half of everything I had built in the shadows. He would get half of my hard-earned $740,000. He would use my secret fortune to pay his IRS debts and fund his mistress's luxury lifestyle. The very thought of his arrogant hands touching a single dollar of my hidden wealth made my blood boil with fiery rage. I could not simply run away. I could not just take my money and start a new life. If I did, He would hunt me down in legal discovery and bleed me dry. I had to protect my empire. To do that, I had to dismantle his life completely. I needed to act like the naive church mouse for just a little while longer. I had to let him believe his wicked plan was working, lull him into a false sense of security, and then detonate his reality. I needed to expose his financial crimes and ensure that when the dust finally settled, he would be the one walking away with absolutely nothing. I closed the laptop, locked it back in the hidden drawer, and took a deep, steadying breath. The mourning wife was dead. The corporate auditor had taken the wheel. I was going to ruin him, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. The heavy oak front door swung open, bringing the arrival of my unfaithful husband. Bradley walked in looking tanned, carrying a massive bouquet of pink lilies. He wore a tailored linen shirt, presenting the flawless image of a devoted husband returning from a business trip. If I had not stood in the shadows of the country club terrace 2 days prior, listening to him and his mother plot my financial execution, I might have believed his loving smile. He pulled me into an embrace, kissing my head while murmuring apologies about missing me. I closed my eyes, forcing my body to relax into his arms. I had to play my part perfectly. The naive church bookkeeper could not show suspicion. That evening, the charade continued over Sunday dinner. Brenda, my mother-in-law, arrived precisely at 6. I served a slow-roasted pot roast, acting every bit the submissive wife they believed me to be. Brenda glowed with pride, praising his tireless ambition. She shot me condescending glances, reminding me how lucky I was to be married to a man of such high caliber. I smiled politely, swallowing the bitter taste of their shared deception. Bradley let out a theatrical sigh. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers, tossing them casually onto the polished wood right next to my plate. "It is just some boring administrative nonsense for the brokerage, Sarah," he said dismissively. "My firm is updating our corporate liability policies. The legal department needs a signature acknowledging my business debts are separate from our personal assets. It is purely a formality." Brenda took a sip of her Cabernet Sauvignon and nodded. "You should sign it right now, dear," she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Bradley has to submit everything tomorrow morning. We certainly do not want to hold up his workflow." I wiped my mouth with a napkin, my heart hammering. I pulled the stack of documents toward me. The cover page looked exactly like the mundane corporate waivers I processed at the church. The font was small, and the paragraphs were deliberately dense, designed to exhaust a casual reader into skipping to the final page. Bradley handed me a silver pen, tapping his finger impatiently against the table. I expected the foolish woman who wore thrifted cardigans to blindly sign on the dotted line. But as my eyes scanned the first paragraph, the mourning wife vanished completely, and the elite forensic auditor took absolute control. 3 years of dissecting complex corporate mergers kicked into high gear. I skipped past the boilerplate clauses and zeroed in on the sub-paragraphs buried deep within the third page. A cold chill washed over my body. This was not a liability waiver, it was a meticulously crafted financial guillotine. Hidden beneath the deliberately confusing legal jargon was a massive home equity line of credit application. The document named the debt-free house I inherited from my parents as the sole collateral. Bradley was leveraging my pristine credit score to secure a massive loan, undoubtedly to pay off his IRS debts and fund the luxury apartment for his young mistress. The final pages contained an ironclad post-nuptial agreement. By signing this, I would be legally waiving my right to claim any marital assets, forfeiting all spousal support, and accepting responsibility for his commercial losses. They were tricking me into financing my own replacement while stripping me of every legal protection I had. Bradley smiled at me over his wineglass. Brenda watched me like a hawk. The sheer audacity of their evil was breathtaking. They sat at my dining table eating the warm food I cooked, drinking the expensive wine I poured, handing me the instrument of my absolute destruction. I desperately needed time. I needed to consult my attorney and ensure these specific documents never reached a notary, but I could not refuse to sign without raising their immediate suspicion. "Oh, wow, the legal jargon in here is incredibly confusing," I said, maintaining a bright, clueless smile as I picked up the pen. I leaned forward, bringing the pen toward the signature line. As I shifted my weight, I deliberately clipped the base of my crystal wineglass with my elbow. The glass tipped over in slow motion. A violent wave of dark red wine cascaded across the table, splashing directly onto the thick stack of papers. The dark liquid instantly soaked through the porous paper, obliterating the signature lines, blurring the text, and turning the fraudulent documents into a soggy mess. "Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly clumsy," I shrieked, jumping up and grabbing cloth napkins to desperately dab at the spreading stain. "I am so sorry, Bradley. I just knocked it right over." Bradley leaped to his feet, a flash of genuine fury crossing his features before he wrestled his expression back into a mask of mild annoyance. He snatched the dripping papers from the table, but it was far too late. The ink was bleeding, and the documents were completely unsalvageable. Brenda gasped loudly, glaring at me with disgust. "It is fine." Sarah Bradley snapped, his jaw clenched tightly. "I will just have to request a fresh copy from the legal department tomorrow." I apologize again, looking down at my ruined tablecloth with feigned embarrassment. "I can drive down to your office on Tuesday afternoon to sign the new ones. Will that be okay?" He let out a frustrated breath and nodded curtly, tossing the ruined papers into the trash bin. "Tuesday is fine. Just be careful next time." I lowered my head and began gathering the empty dinner plates, hiding the cold, triumphant smile forming on my lips. The fraudulent documents were completely destroyed. I had successfully bought myself 48 hours. 48 hours to hire the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state, firmly secure my hidden offshore fortune, and prepare a devastating counterattack that would shatter his entire fake world. Bradley stood by the granite island, his posture rigid. The ruined loan documents sat in the trash bin stained with dried red wine. I saw the furious pulse beating rapidly in his jaw, but when he turned to look at me, he forced his features into a mask of mild patience. It was the same polished look he used to close real estate deals. He offered me a tight, unconvincing smile. "We are going to resolve this tomorrow, Sarah," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I have already called my notary. She's expecting us at my brokerage office at 10 in the morning. I will have the legal department print fresh liability waivers. All you need to do is show up, sign your name, and we can finally put this administrative headache behind us." I stood by the sink, holding a dish towel, playing the compliant, slightly clumsy wife. I nodded eagerly, projecting innocent apology. "Of course, Bradley," I replied softly. "I will be there." He let out a dismissive breath, grabbed his briefcase, and walked out. The moment the garage door shut, the timid housewife vanished. My shoulders squared, and a cold surgical focus took over. He thought he had me cornered, rushing me to a notary before I could read the fine print. I grabbed my purse, leaving the house with absolute purpose. My first stop was a private vault facility downtown. I accessed my secure deposit box, withdrawing $25,000 in crisp-banded $100 bills. I drove to the most intimidating glass skyscraper in the financial district. I rode the elevator to the penthouse floor, stepping into the sleek reception area of Thomas Vance. Thomas was the most ruthless and expensive divorce attorney in the state. I walked past the stunned receptionist, placed the cash directly onto the massive glass desk, and sat down. I told him I needed to dismantle my husband and had exactly 24 hours to build my fortress before my scheduled execution. Thomas leaned back, a predatory smile crossing his sharp features. He swept the cash into his drawer and went to work. For the next 3 hours, we sat in his soundproof conference room. I provided him with the financial breadcrumbs I had gathered, including the forged home equity line of credit and the secret text messages. Thomas began running background checks on public tax records. I expected Thomas to draft a brutal divorce petition and file an emergency injunction to freeze the house. But when Thomas returned holding freshly printed government records, his expression was grim. The predatory excitement in his eyes had been replaced by calculating caution. He placed a federal tax transcript on the table. "We have a massive problem," Sarah Thomas said, his voice stripped of all pleasantries. "You cannot file for divorce today. If you serve him with papers right now, you will be walking directly into a federal prison cell." I stared at him, my heart stalling. "What are you talking about?" I asked, leaning forward to inspect the documents. "I have never broken a financial law in my life." "You have not," Thomas corrected, pointing a gold pen at the signature line of the tax transcript. "But your husband has, and he used your identity to do it. Bradley has been hemorrhaging money at his brokerage for years. To avoid paying corporate tax liabilities, he deliberately shifted his business losses onto your personal Social Security number. He forged your signature on every single federal document." A wave of profound nausea washed over me. I looked at the copies of the tax returns. There on the bottom of each page was a perfect replication of my handwriting. Bradley had set me up as the ultimate and complete financial scapegoat. If you divorce him right now, Thomas explained, the legal severance will trigger an automatic audit of his brokerage by the Internal Revenue Service. The moment the federal government sees the financial collapse of his company, they will look at these joint tax returns. They will see your signature and social security number and hold you jointly liable for his millions of dollars in hidden tax fraud. If he drowns, you drown with him. The sheer breathtaking and dangerous evil of his plan paralyzed me. Bradley did not just want to drain the equity from my inherited home to buy an apartment for his mistress. He orchestrated a scenario where I would be left destitute, carrying the burden of his federal crimes while he walked away clean. He truly meant it when he laughed and said I would die broke. I sat back in my chair, the plush leather suddenly feeling like a trap. The panic tried to claw its way up my throat, but I forced it down. I specialized in unraveling the impossible. I looked across the table at Thomas, meeting his gaze with an icy, unyielding determination. So we do not file the divorce papers today, I stated, my voice steadying into a calm, dangerous tone. I play along right now. I go to his notary tomorrow. I smile, I stole, and I keep playing the naive church mouse. Behind the scenes, I gather ironclad proof of his forgery. I build a whistleblower case so airtight that the federal government grants me immunity and sends him directly to a federal penitentiary. Thomas smiled, a genuine look of professional respect dawning on his face. Exactly, he said very quietly. You're going to have to walk back into that house and act like a loving wife while we secretly prepare the guillotine. I carefully closed my laptop. I walked out of the law firm and stepped back into the bustling city streets. Bradley thought he had played the ultimate game of chess, but he had fundamentally misunderstood his opponent. He thought he was dealing with a submissive, heartbroken wife. He was about to find out what happens when you try to commit financial treason. The counterattack had officially begun. The heavy oak front door slammed shut behind me as I marched out into the blinding afternoon sun. Travis was halfway down the driveway, tossing his rusty toolbox into the bed of his dented pickup truck. The folded title to my late father's vintage Mustang was burning a hole in his denim pocket. He thought he had outsmarted the naive church bookkeeper, entirely unaware that he had just stepped into the crosshairs of a forensic auditor. I marched down the concrete steps. Travis turned around, a greasy smirk stretching across his unshaven face. He leaned against the rusted tailgate, crossing his arms in a display of unearned confidence. Give it back, Travis, I demanded, my voice remarkably steady. The warm Ohio breeze rustled the leaves, but the atmosphere between us was freezing. Give what back, Sarah, he replied, his tone dripping with mock innocence. I came over to check those pipes like Bradley asked. Your plumbing is fine. You might just be hearing things, he chuckled. I closed the distance just enough to let him see the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. I am not playing games. I know exactly what you took from the yellow room upstairs. I have high-definition security cameras hidden in that room, and I watched you force open my filing cabinet. Hand over my vehicle title, or I will call the police and have you arrested for burglary. The smug grin vanished from his face, replaced by genuine panic, but it only lasted for a fraction of a second. Travis puffed out his chest, trying to use his height to intimidate me. You want to call the cops? Go ahead, he challenged, taking a menacing step forward. Let us see what Bradley has to say about those hidden bank statements I found. You are hiding money from my brother Sarah. You have secret accounts and vintage cars stashed away while Bradley is out there breaking his back. If you call the cops, I will march straight to his office and tell him his sweet little church mouse wife is a greedy liar. He will divorce you and take half of everything you have been hiding. You will be out on the street with nothing. He stood there, breathing heavily, fully believing he had just delivered a checkmate. He expected me to burst into tears and beg for his silence. Instead of crying, I felt a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. Travis was trying to play chess with a woman who owned the entire board. I reached into my oversized tote bag and pulled out my encrypted iPad. I unlocked the screen and opened a meticulously organized spreadsheet. I took a step closer, holding the glowing screen up so he could clearly see the columns of numbers. You really think you hold the winning hand? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Take a very close look at this screen, Travis. Tell me if those vendor names look familiar to you. Travis squinted at the bright display. I watched the color drain completely from his face. His ruddy complexion turned a sickly shade of ash gray. The blustering bully melted away, leaving behind a terrified thief. The spreadsheet contained a comprehensive record of his own criminal activities. For the past 4 years, Bradley had been hiring Travis as an independent contractor to handle staging and property cleanups for his real estate listings. Using my forensic accounting skills, I had secretly audited those vendor accounts months ago. What is this? Travis stammered, his voice suddenly weak. This is a detailed record of every single phantom invoice you have submitted to your brother's brokerage. I explained, my tone surgical and precise. You billed Bradley for premium landscaping services, but photographs show you did nothing more than mow the lawn yourself. You invoiced him for deep cleaning services using a fake limited liability company registered to your home address. You have been systematically skimming from his operational budget. The total amount you have embezzled from your own brother currently stands at $42,000. That is a felony, Travis. He opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came out. Bradley thinks you are just lazy. I continued, driving the final nail into his coffin. He has no idea you are actively robbing him blind. Bradley is an arrogant man with a vicious temper. What do you think he will do to you when I send him this file? He will press charges, and the district attorney will send you to a state penitentiary for wire fraud. You think you can threaten me over an old car title? I hold the keys to your actual freedom. Please, Sarah, he whispered, all the fight completely gone from his posture. His hands began to shake visibly. Do not send that to him. He will kill me. I will go to jail. Please. I locked the iPad screen and slid the device back into my bag. I am giving you exactly 2 choices today, Travis. Choice number 1 is that you walk away right now. I hit send, Bradley gets the spreadsheet, and the police arrive at your apartment before dinner. I paused, letting the weight of his impending doom settle heavily on his shoulders. He shook his head frantically, pleading silently. Choice number 2, I said, my voice hardening into absolute authority. You become my personal informant. You're going to be my mole inside Bradley's office. You're going to quietly slip me his private login credentials. You're going to forward me his closing schedules and internal emails. You will report his every move directly to me, and you will never breathe a word of this to anyone. If you do exactly as I say, this spreadsheet stays buried. If you try to double-cross me, I will destroy your life without a second thought. Yes! Travis gasped, nodding his head so fast he looked ridiculous. Whatever you want, Sarah. I swear I will get you the passwords. I will be your guy on the inside. Just please do not show him those invoices. Then give me the envelope, I commanded, holding out my hand. Travis frantically dug into his pocket. He pulled out the crumpled, cream-colored envelope containing the title to my vintage Mustang and handed it over with trembling fingers. I snatched it from his grasp, smoothing out the creased paper. Get off my driveway, I ordered, turning my back on him. I expect an email with his office passwords by 8 o'clock tonight. I walked back up the concrete steps and let myself into the house, listening to the frantic screech of tires as Travis sped away. He had arrived at my home thinking he was a predator. He left as my terrified, obedient servant. The first piece of my husband's empire had just fallen perfectly into my hands. The real war was finally ready to begin. The automatic sliding doors of the local grocery store opened with a quiet swoosh, ushering me into the cool air-conditioned aisles. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was pushing a shopping cart with a squeaky right wheel, gathering ingredients for the upcoming Sunday church potluck. I carefully selected bags of russet potatoes, cans of cream of mushroom soup, and fresh green beans. This was my world, or at least the world Bradley believed I exclusively inhabited. I was playing the role of the frugal, dedicated church bookkeeper, planning a humble casserole that would feed 20 people on a shoestring budget. My mind was already running through the timeline of my impending counterattack against my husband, but for now, I had to maintain the flawless facade of domestic normalcy. I navigated my cart toward checkout lane number 4. A teenager with a bored expression scanned my items, dragging the heavy bags of potatoes across the laser reader. The total came to exactly $48.75. I offered the young cashier a warm, polite smile and reached into my worn leather wallet, pulling out the blue debit card linked to my joint checking account with Bradley. For 8 years, this card had been the primary artery of our household finances, the same account I had constantly replenished with my own meager church salary to cover his bounced checks. I slid the plastic card into the chip reader and waited for the familiar approving chime. Instead, the machine let out a harsh, flat buzz. The small digital screen flashed a bright red message reading "Transaction declined." The cashier sighed heavily, popping a bubble of chewing gum. "Can you try taking it out and putting it back in again?" he asked, sounding profoundly inconvenienced. I pulled the card out, wiped the metal chip on my thrifted cardigan, and inserted it a second time. My heart began a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I knew there was over $4,000 in that specific account just yesterday morning. The machine buzzed again louder this time. Declined. Contact card issuer. A middle-aged woman standing in line behind me shifted her weight impatiently, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. A hot flush of genuine embarrassment crept up my neck. Even though I possessed a secret offshore account with nearly $750,000, the visceral public humiliation of being declined at a grocery store register hit me hard. I apologized softly to the cashier, abandoning my cart full of carefully chosen vegetables, and walked briskly out of the store. The blinding Ohio afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt parking lot as I pulled my phone from my purse. I opened the banking application, intending to transfer a few dollars from my church payroll account to cover the groceries. I stared at the login screen. My face recognition failed. I typed in my password carefully, ensuring every letter was correct. The screen refreshed, and a cold gray notification box popped up. Account access revoked. Primary account holder has modified security credentials. Please contact your local branch. Bradley had completely locked me out. He had not simply drained the funds to pay for his mistress or his debts, he had intentionally severed my digital access to our shared marital assets. He was initiating the financial starvation phase of his plan. He wanted to strip me of my resources, trap me in a state of desperate panic, and force me into absolute submission before he handed me the divorce papers. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of his maneuver, my phone began to vibrate violently in my palm. Bradley was calling me. He was likely monitoring the account activity online, waiting for the exact moment I tried to swipe the card. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing my vocal cords to relax into a state of vulnerable anxiety. I pressed the green answer button and brought the phone to my ear. "Bradley," I said, my voice trembling perfectly on cue. "I am at the grocery store, and my card just declined. I cannot log into the banking app either. What is going on?" "Oh, sweetheart." His voice came through the speaker, dripping with a thick artificial sweetness that made my stomach churn. "I am so sorry you had to find out at the store like that. There has been a massive bank error. The fraud department called me about an hour ago. It seems there is some sort of algorithmic hold on our accounts because of an unexpected Internal Revenue Service audit. They froze absolutely everything." I was lying. It was a flawlessly delivered lie spoken with the smooth, rehearsed cadence of a seasoned real estate agent closing a fraudulent deal. He was testing my gullibility, banking on my absolute trust in him. "An audit," I gasped, injecting a note of rising panic into my performance. "Bradley, what are we going to do? I do not have a single dollar on me. I had to leave a whole cart of food at the register. How are we going to eat this week?" I heard the faint sound of a leather chair squeaking on his end of the line. He was probably leaning back in his luxurious office chair, completely intoxicated by his own perceived power. "Listen to me, Sarah," he said, his tone shifting to a patronizing condescension. "You are just going to have to be resourceful. Go to your boss at the church. Tell the pastor we hit a little rough patch. They have that food pantry in the basement, do they not? You spend enough hours volunteering down there. It is time you took a few cans of soup for yourself. You will just have to rely on church charity for a few days until I can sort this out with the bank executives." The sheer breathtaking cruelty of his suggestion hung heavily in the humid parking lot air. My husband, the man who wore custom silk ties and bought $4,000 diamond bracelets for his young mistress, was casually instructing me to beg for canned food from a charity pantry. He wanted to break my spirit entirely. He wanted me to feel the crushing weight of poverty, so that when he finally threw me out onto the street, I would be too weak and starved to fight back. "Okay, Bradley," I whispered, letting a fake sob catch in the back of my throat. "I will go to the church. I will figure it out. Please just fix this soon. I will do my best, honey. Just stay out of my way and let the men handle the finances," he replied, before abruptly ending the call. The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. The manufactured tears that had gathered in the corners of my eyes instantly vanished, replaced by a gaze of cold surgical precision. I stood alone beside my 10-year-old rattling sedan, gripping the door handle. Bradley thought he had just delivered a masterstroke of psychological warfare. He believed he had successfully pushed the naive church mouse into a corner of desperate starvation. I had absolutely no idea that the woman he was trying to starve was an elite forensic accountant sitting on a secret cash reserve of $740,000. He wanted a war of attrition. He wanted to see me break. I unlocked my car door and slid into the driver's seat, a dangerous, triumphant smile spreading across my face. Let him enjoy his delusion of absolute control for a few more days. The trap was set, the evidence was mounting, and his financial starvation tactic had only guaranteed that my impending retaliation would be utterly, completely, and catastrophically merciless. The Sunday morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the community fellowship hall, casting vibrant colors across the worn linoleum floor. I stood quietly behind the long folding tables, arranging heavy aluminum trays of baked ziti. As the humble parish bookkeeper, this modest hall was my safe haven. I poured countless cups of weak black coffee with a practiced, gracious smile. The heavy wooden double doors at the front of the hall suddenly swung open, bringing an immediate hush over the usual post-sermon chatter. Walking into the sacred space of my sanctuary was Brenda, my mother-in-law, wearing a tailored pastel suit and an expression of supreme pious arrogance. But it was the younger woman walking closely beside her that made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. It was Chloe. Bradley had the terrifying audacity to allow his mother to bring his 24-year-old mistress to my church potluck under the guise of a visiting guest. Chloe wore a bright yellow sundress entirely too expensive and slightly too short for a Sunday service. She clung tightly to Brenda's arm, projecting a sickeningly sweet, fabricated innocence. And there, glinting relentlessly under the harsh fluorescent lights, was the diamond tennis bracelet wrapped around her slender wrist. I forced my hands to keep moving, gripping a black plastic serving spoon so tightly my knuckles turned completely white. A lesser woman might have caused a massive dramatic scene, screaming her husband's vile sins to the shocked congregation. But I was not a fragile, weeping victim anymore. I was an elite forensic accountant, actively building an airtight federal whistleblower case. Brenda guided Chloe slowly through the buffet line, purposefully introducing her to the influential church elders as a brilliant new real estate associate at Bradley's firm. They approached my serving station. Brenda looked right through me, her eyes filled with cold, cruel triumph. She wanted me to cause a hysterical scene, giving Bradley the perfect excuse to expedite his fraudulent divorce. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I smiled warmly, looking directly at the sparkling diamond bracelet as I served a generous portion of warm casserole onto Chloe's paper plate. "Welcome to our fellowship," I said, my voice incredibly smooth and perfectly pleasant. Chloe offered a tight, confused smirk, clearly thrown off by my absolute lack of public devastation. They moved along to sit with the parish council. An hour later, the loud crowd began to thin out, and I carried a heavy stack of empty serving trays into the cramped church kitchen. I turned around to find Chloe standing inside, blocking the only exit. Away from the watchful moral eyes of the congregation, her innocent facade melted away completely, revealing the vicious, calculating girl hidden underneath. She slowly looked me up and down, her gaze lingering maliciously on my faded, thrifted grey cardigan and the scuffed, sensible shoes I had worn for 3 years. "You know, Sarah," she began, her high-pitched voice dripping with a thick, condescending fake pity. "Bradley told me you were struggling, but I had absolutely no idea it was this bad." I placed the aluminum trays onto the stainless steel counter, meticulously wiping my hands on a clean dish towel. Chloe reached into her designer leather handbag, the one Bradley had undoubtedly purchased with stolen client escrow funds, and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. She took a deliberate step forward and pressed the green money onto the cold counter right next to my resting hands. "You really need to buy yourself some new shoes, honey," she cooed, tilting her blonde head in mock sympathy. "Bradley is moving on to bigger and better things. You should really start accepting your reality before you end up out on the street with absolutely nothing." The humid air in the small kitchen felt suffocatingly heavy, thick with her venomous insult. She fully expected me to slap her across the face. She expected me to burst into humiliated, defeated tears and throw the $20 bill back at her. Instead, a genuine, relaxed smile spread naturally across my face. I reached out and calmly picked up the $20 bill, folding it neatly and sliding it into the front pocket of my cardigan. "Thank you so much, Chloe," I said, my tone radiating an unshakable, serene authority. "Every little financial contribution helps the church food pantry immensely." I took a slow, deliberate step closer to her, closing the physical distance until I could see the sudden, undeniable flicker of nervous uncertainty in her wide eyes. I let my gaze drop directly to the glittering stones resting on her wrist. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice beautifully pleasant, but laced with a lethal razor-sharp edge. "And God bless you, sweetheart," I whispered softly. "It truly takes a tremendous amount of courage to wear cubic zirconia to a house of God." The smug, confident smile vanished from Chloe's face instantly. Her fair skin turned a deep, blotchy shade of crimson red. She looked down at her wrist in sudden, panicked horror, pulling her arm back, as if the bracelet had physically burned her. She opened her mouth to argue, but the absolute certainty in my eyes silenced her completely. I gracefully sidestepped her frozen frame, pushing through the swinging doors and walking out of the kitchen with my dignity entirely intact. I stepped out the back doors of the church into the bright Ohio afternoon, feeling a surge of pure, victorious adrenaline. Just as I reached my old rattling sedan, my cell phone vibrated sharply in my purse. I pulled the device out and looked closely at the glowing screen. It was a secure, encrypted text message from Travis Bradley's terrified younger brother. The message contained exactly what I had demanded from him: a comprehensive list of master passwords, administrative database logins, and remote portal access codes for Bradley's entire commercial real estate brokerage. The digital keys to my complete and absolute revenge. The thick scent of roasting hickory wood and expensive smoked brisket drifted over our manicured backyard. It was a flawless Saturday afternoon in late summer, and Bradley was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He had organized a massive barbecue inviting the most influential real estate partners and wealthy commercial investors in the county. He stood on the limestone patio wearing a crisp designer polo shirt and expensive sunglasses, holding a stainless steel spatula like a royal scepter. He laughed loudly at jokes that were not funny and clapped men on the shoulder, projecting the flawless image of an industry titan. To everyone holding a cold craft beer on our lush green lawn, he was the absolute epitome of the American dream. He appeared to be a successful, dedicated businessman with a beautiful home and a supportive, loving wife. I moved quietly through the bustling crowd, carrying heavy silver trays of chilled potato salad and freshly sliced fruit. I wore a simple, modest sundress, playing my assigned role to absolute perfection. I smiled warmly at the wives of his business partners, refilling their glasses of iced tea and graciously accepting their compliments on my blooming rose garden. Inside my chest, my heart beat with a steady, cold, and mechanical rhythm. They looked at me and saw a meek, quiet church bookkeeper. They had absolutely no idea that I had spent the last several sleepless nights gathering explosive financial evidence that would eventually send the man currently flipping burgers into a federal penitentiary. I watched him pour an expensive glass of aged bourbon for a potential client. He was actively spending money he did not have to impress people who did not truly care about him, while his empire secretly burned to the ground. The afternoon dragged on under the relentless Ohio sun. The loud, upbeat music from the outdoor speakers masked the shallow, superficial conversations of the wealthy crowd. Every so often, I would catch Bradley looking at me from across the yard. His gaze was not filled with the usual dismissive annoyance or casual neglect. Today, there was a dark, calculating anticipation in his eyes. He watched my every move like a hungry predator, waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike. He thought I was completely oblivious to the trap he had meticulously set. He firmly believed that his cruel financial starvation tactics from earlier in the week had completely broken my spirit. He truly thought he had pushed me into a corner of desperate compliance. I walked back into the air-conditioned relief of our spacious house to fetch more ice from the freezer. The sudden quiet inside the kitchen was a sharp, jarring contrast to the chaotic noise of the party outside. I leaned heavily against the cool granite countertop, taking a long, deep breath to steady my frayed nerves. I knew Bradley was planning something monumental today. The arrogant, aggressive confidence radiating from him all afternoon was a glaring signal. Suddenly, the heavy wooden kitchen door swung shut, cutting off the loud bass of the music outside. I heard the firm, familiar footsteps crossing the hardwood floor behind me. Bradley had abandoned his guests and followed me inside. I turned around, instantly pasting a mild, submissive, and eager smile on my face. "Do we need more napkins out there, Bradley?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly light and pleasantly helpful. Bradley did not answer my question. He reached over and turned the brass lock on the kitchen door with a sharp, definitive click. The charming, charismatic host who had just been laughing on the patio vanished instantly. The polished mask dropped completely to the floor, revealing the cold, ruthless, and entirely selfish man hiding underneath. He walked toward me, his posture rigid and towering. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. He tossed it callously onto the granite island. The brown paper slid across the smooth, polished stone and stopped just inches from my resting hands. "What is this, Bradley?" I asked, letting my voice waver just enough to sound authentically confused and frightened. My eyes darted frantically from the brown envelope to his stern face. I knew exactly what it was, but the elite forensic auditor operating inside my mind demanded that I let him play his hand entirely. I needed him to confess his intentions out loud. "Open it," he commanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. I reached out with intentionally trembling fingers and unfastened the metal clasp of the envelope. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of formal legal documents. The bold black letters printed at the very top of the first page read, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." I stared at the devastating words, forcing my breathing to become shallow and rapid to mimic a panic attack. I looked up at him, widening my eyes to project absolute heartbreak and total shock. "Bradley, what are you doing?" I whispered, clutching the heavy papers tightly to my chest. "We are married. We are a family. You cannot just do this to me out of nowhere." He took a slow, deliberate step closer, backing me firmly against the edge of the kitchen sink. A cruel, victorious smirk stretched widely across his handsome face. He thoroughly enjoyed watching me crumble. He visibly relished the absolute power he thought he held over my entirely fabricated misery. "It is over, Sarah," he sneered, looking down at me with pure, unfiltered contempt. "I am completely done carrying dead weight. I have drained our joint checking and savings accounts. The home equity line of credit on this house has been fully processed, and the money is already gone. You have absolutely nothing left to your name." He leaned in, so incredibly close I could smell the sharp tang of the expensive bourbon on his breath. His dark eyes burned with a malicious, triumphant fire. "I have set everything up perfectly," he whispered, his voice dripping with toxic venom. "You are going to sign those divorce papers today without a single fight. You will pack your bags and leave this house quietly by the end of the week. Because I am a reasonable man, I will be generous enough to let you keep that pathetic old clunker car parked in the driveway. Do not even think about hiring a lawyer or trying to fight me in a courtroom. You do not have a single dollar left to pay for one. You will sign the papers and walk away, Sarah. Otherwise, you will die broke." The heavy manila envelope felt like a block of lead in my trembling hands. I stared down at the bold black letters of the divorce petition, letting the visual weight of the document sink in. Bradley stood over me, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride, fully believing he had just delivered the ultimate fatal blow to my entire existence. He expected a complete and total breakdown. I was an elite forensic auditor, a master of calculated strategy, and I knew that to win this war, I had to give him exactly the pathetic spectacle he desired. I let my knees buckle. I collapsed onto the cold hardwood floor of our kitchen, the fabric of my modest sundress pooling around me in a heap. I forced my breathing to become rapid and shallow, hyperventilating until genuine tears pricked the corners of my eyes. A loud, heart-wrenching sob tore from my throat, echoing sharply against the pristine granite countertops. I dropped the divorce papers and covered my face with my hands, rocking back and forth in a theatrical display of absolute devastation. "Bradley, please," I wailed, letting my voice crack with manufactured despair. "Please do not do this to me. We are a family. We have been together for 8 years. You cannot just throw me away like this. I have given you my youth, my savings, my unwavering support through every single hardship. I will do whatever you want. I will work extra shifts at the church. Please just save our marriage." I reached out my fingers, grasping blindly at the hem of his expensive designer trousers. I looked up at him through a veil of blurry tears, projecting the image of a broken, terrified woman who had just realized her entire world was ending. Inside my mind, a cold mechanical timer was ticking, analyzing his every micro-expression with surgical precision. Bradley did not step back to comfort me. He stood perfectly still, soaking in my humiliation like a parched man drinking water. A low, cruel chuckle rumbled in his chest, vibrating through the quiet kitchen. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of pity and supreme triumph. He was completely intoxicated by his own inflated ego. To him, I was nothing more than a pathetic, dependent creature, clinging to his ankles, begging for scraps of his attention. "It is far too late for begging, Sarah," he sneered, his voice dripping with venomous condescension. "You should have thought about saving this marriage before you became such a dragging anchor on my life. I am moving on to bigger and better things. I need a partner who understands real ambition, someone who shines in the spotlight, not a drab little church mouse who cries on the kitchen floor over spilt milk. You're completely, entirely useless to me now." I squeezed my eyes shut, letting out another loud, desperate sob that shook my entire frame. "Bradley, I have absolutely nowhere to go," I pleaded, my voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "You drained the joint accounts. You took the equity out of my parents' home. I have absolutely nothing left to my name. Please, I am begging you, just give me some time. Give me 1 week to process this shock. Just 7 days to figure out how I am going to survive this nightmare. You cannot just throw me out onto the street today without a penny. Please, Bradley, 1 single week." He stared down at me, clearly savoring the absolute power he held over my immediate future. He rubbed his chin smoothly, pretending to consider my pathetic plea with the gravity of a king, deciding the fate of a peasant. He thrived on the illusion of being a generous, magnanimous victor, bestowing mercy upon the weak. "Fine," he snapped, kicking his legs slightly to forcefully dislodge my gripping fingers from his trousers. "Because I am not a total monster, I will give you exactly 7 days. You have 1 week to pack up your cheap thrift store clothes and get out of my house. Next Saturday, I want you gone. And do not even think about causing a scene or trying to hire some cheap public defender to fight this. You will sign those papers, leave the keys on the island counter, and walk away quietly. If you make this difficult, I promise you will deeply regret it." "Thank you," I sobbed loudly, bowing my head so low my forehead touched the cold wood. "Thank you, Bradley." He let out a loud, dismissive scoff, stepping over my crumpled form as if I were a decaying piece of garbage, blocking his path. He unlocked the kitchen door and stepped back out onto the sunlit limestone patio. The loud, upbeat music and the boisterous chatter of his wealthy real estate partners immediately flooded back into the room. I remained on the floor perfectly still, listening closely to his booming, arrogant voice carrying effortlessly over the large crowd. "Sorry for the delay, gentlemen," Bradley announced loudly, ensuring every single person at the barbecue could hear his triumphant boast. "I just had to take out the trash. The dead weight has officially been cut loose. Drink up, everyone. I have a flight to catch in an hour for a very special, highly exclusive business trip." Raucous laughter erupted from the patio, a sickening chorus of wealthy men congratulating him on his newfound freedom. I knew exactly what that supposed business trip entailed. He was flying away with Chloe, taking his young, flashy mistress on a lavish vacation, funded entirely by the stolen escrow deposits of the very investors currently drinking his expensive craft beer. The heavy wooden door swung shut again abruptly, cutting off the noise and returning the kitchen to a heavy, suffocating silence. I listened intently as his heavy footsteps faded away down the stone path, followed minutes later by the roaring engine of his leased luxury SUV speeding aggressively down the long driveway. The exact moment the sound of his vehicle completely disappeared into the distance, a profound, chilling transformation occurred in the quiet kitchen. The loud, hysterical sobs ceased instantly, cut off as sharply as a flipped electrical switch. My shaking shoulders stilled. The manufactured tears dried on my cheeks, leaving behind absolutely no trace of sorrow. I slowly pushed myself off the cold floor, gracefully smoothing down the wrinkles in my simple sundress. I calmly walked over to the stainless steel kitchen sink, turned on the cold water faucet, and splashed my face. I grabbed a crisp paper towel and dried my skin with slow, deliberate precision. The broken, weeping housewife was officially dead, buried forever beneath the granite countertops. I walked back to the center of the room and picked up the thick manila envelope containing the divorce petition. I did not shed a single tear as I looked at the aggressive legal threats printed on the pages. I tossed the fraudulent documents casually into the trash bin, letting them land right on top of the discarded potato salad scraps. I walked directly to my hidden basement office, my steps firm and echoing with absolute resolve. I sat at my battered metal desk, pulled out my encrypted laptop, and unlocked the secure dashboard. My shadow corporate accounts blazed to life on the screen, displaying my hidden fortune of $740,000. I opened a new file and began compiling the devastating financial evidence Travis had provided, aligning it perfectly with the forged tax documents. Bradley thought he had successfully starved me out and broken my spirit. He had no idea he had just handed me the exact timeline I needed to orchestrate his spectacular downfall. The 7-day countdown begins. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in my windowless basement office. Travis had come through on his promise. The encrypted text message on my heavy wooden desk contained the master passwords and remote access codes to my husband's real estate brokerage. I stared at those strings of characters, feeling a cold anticipation. This was the key to his fortress. I took a deep breath and typed the credentials into the portal. The system paused for a fraction of a second before granting me unrestricted access. The digital doors swung wide open. I was no longer the discarded housewife packing her bags upstairs. I was an elite forensic accountant operating in my truest element, and I was about to dismantle his lifeline by agonizing line. The house above me was completely silent. Bradley had packed his luggage and left for his supposed business trip with Chloe. He had arrogantly given me exactly 7 days to vacate the home my parents had left me. I decided to use the first 48 hours of that countdown to map out his irreversible ruin. I brewed a massive pot of black coffee and settled into my battered metal desk. Forensic accounting requires an agonizing level of patience and a meticulous eye for microscopic details. I began my deep dive by downloading the brokerage's general ledger's operating accounts and employee payroll manifests. For the first 12 hours, the numbers simply confirmed what I already knew deep down. Bradley was a terrible businessman. He spent exorbitant amounts of money on client entertainment car leases and marketing materials that yielded zero return on investment. His operating accounts were drained running on fumes, but being financially incompetent is not a federal crime. I needed to find the actual fraud. I needed the smoking gun that would guarantee his permanent relocation to a federal prison. As the sun rose and set, signaling the passage of my first sleepless day, I shifted my focus to the sacred heart of any real estate firm. The client escrow accounts. In the real estate business, an escrow account holds the earnest money deposits of buyers. It is a legally protected holding pen. A broker has a strict fiduciary duty to never touch those funds until a closing is finalized. I opened the digital ledgers for his primary escrow accounts, and my trained eyes immediately caught the discrepancy. The account balances matched the incoming deposits on the surface, but the transaction histories told a chillingly different story. There were dozens of unauthorized outbound wire transfers, moving hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the protected escrow accounts on a weekly basis. My heart began to pound heavily. I meticulously traced the routing numbers attached to those outbound wires. The money was not being returned to clients or being sent to title companies for closings. Instead, the stolen funds were being funneled into a private corporate banking account registered to an obscure limited liability company. The entity was simply named Horizon Holdings. I immediately accessed the State Business Registry database, crossing-reference public formation documents for this mysterious shell company. The screen slowly loaded, displaying the official articles of organization filed just 6 months ago. The sole managing member and registered agent of Horizon Holdings was Chloe. My husband's 24-year-old mistress was sitting right at the center of a massive web of stolen client funds. The sheer scale of his criminal enterprise finally snapped into focus. Bradley was not just a cheating husband drowning in credit card debt. He was actively running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He was intentionally taking the earnest money deposits from new commercial clients and illegally moving those funds to Horizon Holdings to finance his lavish daily lifestyle. He used the stolen money to pay for his suits, the steakhouse dinners, the luxury vacations, and that diamond tennis bracelet currently sitting on Chloe's wrist. When an older client finally demanded their escrow money back for a scheduled closing, Bradley would simply steal from the next naive investor to silently cover the deficit. He was frantically shuffling stolen money around every single month to maintain the glittering illusion of a highly successful real estate empire. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my exhausted, burning eyes. I had been awake and staring at spreadsheets for nearly 48 hours, but the sheer adrenaline coursing through my veins masked the physical fatigue. The empty coffee mugs scattered across my desk were a silent testament to the marathon I had just survived. The discovery was exhilarating, but it was also dangerous. Bradley was playing a high-stakes game of financial Russian roulette with millions of dollars. If the housing market slowed down even slightly, or if a major investor demanded a sudden external audit, his entire house of cards would collapse. And because he had previously forged my signature on his federal tax returns, shifting his corporate tax liabilities onto my personal social security number, the moment his scheme imploded, the federal government would come looking to hold me responsible. I looked at the digital copies of the fraudulent wire transfers and the fake corporate ledgers, which were now securely backed up on my personal encrypted offshore server. Bradley had laughed and promised that I would die broke. He thought he had engineered my perfect execution while he flew off to paradise with a younger woman. But staring at the irrefutable concrete proof of his massive federal crimes standing before me, I knew the absolute truth. I was holding the exact instrument of his complete and utter destruction. I saved the final batch of documents, organized them into pristine digital folders, and closed the remote portal. The grueling audit was officially complete for now. It was time to take this devastating ammunition to the authorities and ensure that the only place my husband would be permanently moving to was a maximum security federal penitentiary, where he would finally realize the absolute ultimate cost of betraying the woman he had completely underestimated. The heavy oak door of Thomas Vance's law firm closed behind me with a solid, comforting thud. I had barely slept in 2 days. My eyes burned from staring at glowing spreadsheets in my windowless basement, but the adrenaline rushing through my veins made me feel entirely invincible. I carried a thick black leather binder clutched tightly to my chest. It contained every wire transfer, every fake invoice, and every piece of digital evidence proving my husband was running a massive Ponzi scheme. I walked past the receptionist and stepped directly into Thomas' sprawling corner office overlooking the city skyline. Thomas was standing by the window. He turned as I entered, taking in my pale face and the massive binder in my arms. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I dropped the heavy binder onto his pristine glass desk. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet room. I looked my lawyer right in the eye and told him everything. I explained how Bradley had been stealing earnest money deposits from his commercial real estate clients. I detailed how he was funneling those stolen funds into a shell company registered under his young mistress' name to finance their lavish lifestyle. Thomas sat down, opened the binder, and began to read. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp turning of pages. I watched his sharp predatory features shift from professional curiosity to absolute grim realization. When he finally closed the binder, he did not smile. He did not congratulate me on my brilliant forensic accounting. Instead, he folded his hands on the desk and looked at me with a terrifyingly serious expression. "Sarah, we have a catastrophic problem," Thomas said, his voice stripped of all its usual confident bravado. "This is not just a messy divorce anymore. This is a multi-million-dollar federal crime." I nodded, feeling a cold sense of vindication. "I know. That is exactly why I brought it to you. I want him destroyed. I want him to lose everything he built with stolen money." "You are not listening to me," Thomas interrupted, leaning forward. "Bradley did not just steal client funds. Remember the tax transcripts we pulled last week? He forged your signature on years of joint federal tax returns. He intentionally shifted his massive corporate liabilities onto your personal social security number. If this Ponzi scheme implodes, right now the federal government will not just go after him. They will look at the paperwork, see your forged signatures, and assume you were his silent partner in this massive fraud. If you expose him today, the authorities will arrest you too." The air vanished from my lungs. The plush leather chair suddenly felt like a trap. Bradley had completely engineered my destruction. He had designed a scenario where his own wife would serve as the ultimate legal shield. If he went down, he had made absolutely certain I would be dragged down to the very bottom of the ocean with him. The sheer breathtaking evil of his calculation paralyzed me for a moment. But I was no longer the weeping, submissive woman he thought he had starved out. I was a professional who specialized in untangling the impossible. "So how do we cut the rope?" I asked, my voice steadying into a calm, dangerous tone. "How do I burn his empire to the ground without catching fire myself?" Thomas leaned back, a look of profound professional respect returning to his eyes. "We enact the Innocent Spouse Relief Protocol," he explained slowly. "It is a specific provision within the tax code designed to protect victims of financial abuse. But we cannot just file a form and wait. We have to go on the offensive. We have to beat Bradley to the punch and hand the federal government a case so airtight that they grant you absolute immunity in exchange for your cooperation. For the next 3 days, my basement office became a war room. I worked tirelessly alongside Thomas and his legal team. We organized the financial records with surgical precision. I mapped out the flow of every single stolen dollar, tracing it from innocent clients straight to the designer handbags and luxury vacations Bradley bought for Chloe. More importantly, we gathered undeniable proof of the forgery matching Bradley handwriting against my authentic signature. We built a weapon of mass destruction out of paper and ink. The following Tuesday morning, it rained relentlessly. I wore a tailored charcoal suit and drove to a nondescript federal building downtown. Thomas walked beside me as we entered a sterile, windowless conference room. Sitting across the metal table was a senior investigator for the Internal Revenue Service. He was a stern, gray-haired man who looked entirely unimpressed by our arrival. I did not wait for him to interrogate me. I slid the meticulously organized binder across the table. I sat up straight, folded my hands, and looked the federal agent directly in the eye. Inside that binder, you will find irrefutable evidence of a massive ongoing Ponzi scheme operating within a local commercial real estate brokerage. I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. You will find routing numbers, offshore accounts, and proof of systemic tax evasion. You will also find forensic evidence that my husband forged my signature to frame me for his federal crimes. I am offering you the entire criminal enterprise on a silver platter. In return, I require full guaranteed immunity. The agent opened the binder. I watched his skeptical expression slowly melt into absolute astonishment. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly what federal auditors needed to secure a conviction, and I had done all their heavy lifting. The agent read through the executive summary, his eyes widening as he comprehended the sheer scale of Bradley theft. He looked up at me, closing the binder with a definitive snap. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, a note of genuine awe in his voice. "You have just handed us the most comprehensive whistleblower package I have ever seen in my 30-year career." By the time I walked out of that federal building and stepped back into the rainy Ohio afternoon, the perimeter was entirely secured. The legal agreement was signed. The government had granted me complete immunity. I was fully detached from Bradley's sinking ship. The federal authorities were now actively preparing their own warrants, silently loading their weapons, and aiming them directly at my husband. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The rain hammered against the windshield, but I felt nothing but a warm, radiating peace. Bradley had given me 7 days to pack my bags and leave my own home. He thought I was spending this week crying in the dark, preparing to die broke. He had no idea that I had just spent those days handing the federal government the exact coordinates for his complete and utter annihilation. The morning of the 5th day arrived with a relentless downpour that battered the tall glass windows of my inherited home. I sat silently at the kitchen island, cradling a warm cup of black coffee. The house was quiet, creating a stark contrast to the fierce storm outside, and the criminal case I was secretly building in my basement. Bradley had been gone for 5 days on his stolen vacation with his young mistress. He granted me exactly 1 week to pack and vacate before finalizing his fraudulent divorce and stealing my remaining equity. I was deep in thought, reviewing the whistleblower immunity documents my lawyer secured, when a sharp metallic click echoed from the hallway. Someone was unlocking my heavy oak door. I froze. I explicitly changed the alarm codes yesterday, but the deadbolt still accepted the physical spare key. The door swung open to a violent gust of damp wind. Standing on the threshold was my mother-in-law, Brenda. She was wrapped in a beige designer trench coat, holding a dripping umbrella and a thick ring of keys. Behind her stood 2 men carrying towering stacks of flattened moving boxes. Brenda did not knock or announce her arrival. She simply marched into my home with the arrogant entitlement of a conquering general claiming her spoils of war. I placed my mug carefully on the counter and stood up, forcing my posture to reflect the broken, terrified wife they all firmly believed me to be. "What are you doing here, Brenda?" I asked, injecting my voice with the perfect amount of trembling anxiety. Brenda handed her wet umbrella to one of the moving men and wiped her expensive leather boots on my welcome mat. She looked around the spacious living room with a predatory gleam, ignoring my question. She directed the men to drop the pile of cardboard boxes right in the middle of my Persian rug. "Wait out in the truck," she barked at the workers. "I will call you when this pathetic mess is ready." The men nodded silently and exited, shutting the heavy wooden door behind them. Brenda finally turned her cold, judgmental gaze toward me. her lips curled into a vicious, triumphant smile that mirrored her son perfectly. "It is day 5, Sarah," she stated, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "Bradley told me you were dragging your feet. I knew you lacked the competence to handle a relocation, so I decided to come expedite the process myself." She unbuttoned her trench coat and tossed it carelessly over the back of my reading chair. "You need to start packing your cheap clothes right this second. I am moving into the master bedroom this weekend, and I refuse to sleep in a room that smells like your lingering desperation." The breathtaking audacity of her statement hung heavily in the air. She stood in the home my parents purchased, demanding I vacate immediately so she could claim my suite as her own reward. I stepped backward, playing the intimidated victim flawlessly. "Brenda, please," I begged, my voice cracking with manufactured despair. "Bradley gave me until Sunday. You cannot force your way into my house and demand I leave early. I have nowhere else to go." Brenda let out a mocking laugh that echoed against the vaulted ceilings. "Your house," she sneered, taking deliberate steps toward the kitchen. "This property belongs to my son now. The equity line of credit has been processed. You signed away your rights because you were foolish enough to trust him. This house is the foundation of Bradley's real estate empire, and I am reclaiming it for our family." She walked past me, deliberately bumping my shoulder, and headed straight for the dining room. Her eyes darted around, assessing my belongings, not as cherished memories, but as worthless garbage to clear away. She pulled a roll of black plastic trash bags from her handbag and snapped one open with a violent cracking sound. "If you are too incredibly lazy to pack your belongings, I will gladly do it for you," she announced proudly. She marched directly toward the antique glass display cabinet in the corner. My breath caught a flash of genuine panic piercing my carefully maintained facade. That cabinet held the most precious things I owned. It displayed a collection of delicate hand-painted porcelain figures that belonged to my late mother. Those porcelain figures were the only tangible pieces of my mother I had left. They were irreplaceable treasures carrying the memory of a woman who loved me unconditionally. Brenda knew exactly how much they meant to me. For 8 years, she mocked the collection, calling it tacky. Now she stood in front of the glass doors with a look of pure malice. "Do not touch those," I warned, my voice dropping into an icy warning. Brenda looked at me, her smile widening into a grotesque display of cruelty. She yanked the glass doors open forcefully. "These hideous trinkets are an absolute eyesore," she declared loudly. "I will not have this cheap clutter ruining my new dining room." Before I could stop her, Brenda grabbed the most delicate porcelain angel from the top shelf. She did not place it gently into the black bag. She raised her arm and threw it. I heard the sickening crunch of fragile porcelain shattering against the hardwood floor through the thin plastic. The sound ripped straight through my chest. She grabbed a small porcelain bird and violently tossed it into the bag. Another heartbreaking crack echoed loudly. She was systematically destroying my mother's legacy right in front of my eyes, relishing the absolute power she thought she wielded over my broken spirit. I stood frozen, my fingernails digging so deeply into my palms that the skin nearly broke. The primal urge to drag her out of my home was overwhelming, but the forensic accountant inside my mind screamed for total restraint. I needed her to believe she was winning this fabricated war. I needed her to document her own crimes. I slowly pulled my phone from my pocket, subtly pressing the record button, capturing every moment of her illegal trespassing and intentional property damage. The sharp, sickening crack of my mother's delicate porcelain shattering against the hardwood floor was the exact sound that finally killed the meek, subservient housewife Brenda thought she knew. For 8 years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had smiled through her passive-aggressive insults, cooked her holiday meals, and allowed her to treat me like an unwanted guest in my own life. But watching her gleefully destroy the only precious memories I had left of my deceased parents crossed an invisible, irreversible line. The recording application on my phone was still running safely, capturing the digital evidence of her vandalism. I slipped the device smoothly into the deep pocket of my cardigan. The time for gathering evidence was completely over. It was time to draw the iron boundary. Brenda reached blindly into the antique glass display cabinet, her manicured fingers closing tightly around a hand-painted porcelain dove. A cruel, victorious sneer stretched across her heavily powdered face as she raised her arm, fully intending to hurl the delicate figurine into the heavy black plastic trash bag at her feet. She never got the chance. I did not scream, and I did not burst into the pathetic, hysterical tears she was so desperately craving. Instead, I moved across the dining room with a terrifying absolute calm. I reached out and clamped my hand down on her wrist. My grip was hard, unforgiving, and completely devoid of the gentle deference she had grown so accustomed to. Brenda gasped, her eyes widening in genuine shock as she looked at me. The smug satisfaction melted from her features, replaced instantly by a flicker of uncertainty. I twisted her wrist just enough to force her fingers to uncurl. The porcelain dove dropped safely into my waiting palm. I carefully placed the precious figure back onto the glass shelf. Then, with a swift, fluid motion, I snatched the black plastic trash bag from her other hand and tossed it carelessly into the hallway. "How dare you grab me?" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly against the high-vaulted ceilings. She stumbled backward, rubbing her wrist indignantly. "You are losing your mind, Sarah. Bradley is going to hear about this immediately. I am simply cleaning out the garbage before my son throws you out onto the street." I stood tall, squaring my shoulders. The air in the room felt suddenly lighter, purged of the toxic deference I had breathed for nearly a decade. "Your son is a fraud and you are a trespasser," I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, surgical precision that made her flinch. "You seem to be operating under a massive, catastrophic delusion, Brenda. Bradley did not refinance this property, and he certainly does not own it. You cannot steal something that is legally untouchable." I reached into the front pocket of my cardigan and retrieved a crisp, professionally folded legal document. Thomas, my attorney, had finalized the paperwork yesterday afternoon. I stepped forward and pressed the heavy paper firmly against Brenda's chest, forcing her to take it. "Read it very carefully," I commanded. "That is a certified copy of a revocable living trust. This house, the land it sits on, and every single asset within these walls were transferred exclusively into that trust yesterday morning. Bradley's forged home equity line of credit was flagged as fraud and completely voided by the bank. He owns absolutely nothing here. Furthermore, the second document stapled to the back is a legally binding notice of criminal trespass, effectively barring you from setting foot on my property ever again." Brenda stared at the legal papers, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving behind a sickly ashen gray. She tried to formulate a response to scream her usual pious insults, but the sheer overwhelming weight of her defeat rendered her completely mute. She realized in that exact moment that the naive church mouse she had mocked for 8 years had expertly engineered a flawless legal fortress right under her nose. While she stood frozen in a state of absolute shock, I calmly pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the local sheriff's dispatch number. The operator answered immediately. My voice was perfectly steady, radiating the calm authority of a property owner dealing with a nuisance. "Yes, I need an officer dispatched to my residence immediately," I requested, keeping my eyes locked dead onto Brenda's terrified face. "I have an aggressive, unwanted intruder trespassing in my home. She has already destroyed personal property and is currently refusing to vacate the premises." The response time in our quiet suburban neighborhood was impressively fast. Within 10 minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of a patrol cruiser reflected brightly against the rain-slicked windows of my living room. 2 uniformed deputies walked up the concrete driveway. Brenda completely lost whatever fragile composure she had left. When the heavy oak door opened and the officers stepped inside, she began to flail and scream, a hysterical, humiliating display of entitled outrage. She demanded they arrest me, screeching wildly about her son's supposed real estate empire and her prestigious position on the church council. The deputies were entirely unimpressed. After a brief review of the trespassing notice and the property trust, they each grasped one of Brenda's arms. I stood on my front porch, the cool, damp wind brushing against my face, and watched it as they physically escorted the screaming, struggling church matriarch out of my house. The loud, chaotic commotion had drawn the attention of the entire street. Neighbors stood on their manicured lawns holding umbrellas in the pouring rain, watching in absolute shock as the deeply respected Brenda was unceremoniously shoved into the back of a police cruiser like a common criminal. Her public humiliation was absolute and entirely self-inflicted. I offered her a final serene smile before walking back inside and locking my heavy oak door, permanently shutting her out of my life. The morning sun broke brilliantly through the heavy curtains of the master bedroom, marking the dawn of the 7th day. This was the exact non-negotiable deadline my arrogant husband had given me to pack my thrifted clothes and quietly vanish from my own inherited home. I stood alone, in the center of the silent house, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Bradley fully expected to return tonight to a completely empty space, ready to move his young mistress into the rooms I had meticulously cared for over the past 8 years. He had given me a week to break down and die broke. Instead, he had unknowingly provided me with the perfect window of uninterrupted time to orchestrate his absolute legal and financial ruin. I did not pack a single cardboard box. I walked into my spacious walk-in closet and shoved aside the faded grey cardigans and sensible scuffed shoes that had defined my fabricated existence as the naive church bookkeeper. Reaching into the very back of the dark closet, hidden carefully beneath a thick protective garment bag, I pulled out my true skin. It was a stunning custom-tailored navy blue suit, crafted from the finest Italian wool costing exactly $4,000. It was the impenetrable armor of a woman who earned $740,000 a year auditing massive corporate fraud. I slipped it on, feeling the crisp, sharp lines of the expensive fabric mold perfectly to my posture. I paired it with a pristine white silk blouse, a delicate pearl necklace, and a pair of formidable polished stiletto heels. Looking at my reflection in the full-length mirror, the meek, weeping housewife was completely eradicated, replaced by a cold, calculating chief executive officer ready to execute a hostile takeover of her own life. Across town, the afternoon was already in full glorious swing at the crown jewel of Bradley's supposed real estate empire. He was hosting a massive, lavish launch party at a newly constructed multi-million-dollar commercial complex. It was a sprawling modern marvel of tinted glass and polished steel that he loudly claimed to be developing in partnership with his top-tier investors. Through the digital intelligence gathered by my terrified brother-in-law Travis, I knew the sickening truth. This glittering building was actually the epicenter of his massive Ponzi scheme, purchased entirely with stolen client escrow funds that had been illegally funneled through Chloe Hidden Shell Company. But to the outside world, it was a breathtaking celebration of unparalleled success. The entire town wealthy elite had gathered to pay homage. Rich commercial investors, prominent local politicians, and high society figures mingled cheerfully under towering white party tents set up on the manicured front lawn. Dozens of waiters in crisp black vests circulated smoothly, carrying silver trays loaded with expensive champagne and imported caviar hors d'oeuvres. A live string quartet played elegant classical music in the background, perfectly masking the rotting criminal foundation upon which this entire extravagant event was built. Bradley was undoubtedly holding court at the absolute center of it all, playing the charismatic titan of industry with his 24-year-old mistress dripping in stolen diamonds by his side, while his pious mother, Brenda, boasted loudly to her church friends about her son's brilliant achievements. I did not drive my rattling 10-year-old sedan to this final battlefield. I picked up my encrypted phone and authorized a substantial payment from my offshore corporate account. Within an hour, a gleaming black-chauffeured luxury SUV idled smoothly in my driveway, flanked by 2 towering men wearing dark tailored suits and earpieces. I had hired a premium private security detail, hardened professionals, specifically trained to handle high-stakes corporate disputes and aggressively uncooperative individuals. I stepped out of my front door, locking it firmly behind me. The midday sun caught the sharp lapels of my navy suit as I slid gracefully into the luxurious air-conditioned leather interior of the heavy vehicle. The ride across town was silent and absolute. I felt no lingering heartbreak, no fear, and no hesitation, only the icy mechanical precision of an apex predator finally closing in on its trapped prey. As the black SUV turned onto the long, freshly paved driveway of the commercial complex, the heavy tires crunched loudly against the decorative gravel. The imposing vehicle drew the immediate cautious attention of the bustling valet attendants and the private event guards Bradley had hired. They straightened their postures, clearly expecting another incredibly wealthy, high-profile investor to emerge and join the festivities. My driver shifted the heavy vehicle into park, right in front of the main red carpet entrance, intentionally bypassing the designated VIP drop-off zone to create an undeniable, highly disruptive spectacle. My 2 private security guards stepped out of the vehicle first. Their imposing, broad-shouldered frames and stern expressions instantly signaled to the scrambling event staff that they were absolutely not to be interfered with. One of them pulled open my door, standing rigidly at attention. I placed my stiletto heel onto the plush red carpet and stepped out into the brilliant, blinding afternoon sunlight. I stood tall, my shoulders squared, my posture radiating an unassailable, terrifying authority that demanded absolute submission. A sudden, chilling hush began to ripple rapidly through the outer edge of the lavish party. The wealthy guests, closest to the entrance, turned to look, their crystal champagne glasses pausing mid-air in collective shock. They recognized my face as the humble, quiet wife who graciously served baked ziti at Sunday church potlucks, but their minds could simply not comprehend the powerful, dominant, and radiantly wealthy woman standing before them, wrapped in $4,000 of pristine Italian wool. I began to walk forward, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement in a slow, deliberate rhythm of impending doom. I bypassed the greeting podium entirely without a single glance. My security detail formed a tight, impenetrable wall around me, smoothly and effortlessly brushing aside a frantic event coordinator who desperately tried to ask for my printed invitation. I was not a guest at this party. I was the executioner, and I was walking directly toward the grand stage where my treacherous husband was currently raising a flute of champagne to toast his magnificent, entirely fraudulent future. The massive glass doors of the commercial complex towered before me. I took a deep, steadying breath, allowing the cool night air to sharpen my focus before I moved forward. Through the tinted panes, I saw the glittering chandeliers and the elite crowd mingling in expensive evening wear. Two young event guards, stationed at the velvet ropes, stepped forward to block my path. They asked to see my printed invitation. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick banded stack of crisp $100 bills. I pressed the heavy stack directly into the chest of the guard on the right. My gaze was devoid of emotion. "I suggest you take an early dinner break, gentlemen." They looked at the imposing security detail flanking me and wisely stepped aside. I walked right in. The atmosphere inside the grand ballroom was suffocatingly lavish. A string quartet played a soft classical melody. The room was packed with wealthy commercial investors, local politicians, and prominent figures from our community church. I moved through the outer edges of the crowd unnoticed. My eyes scanned the room and instantly locked onto the main stage. Bradley stood under the bright spotlight, holding a microphone and a crystal glass of champagne. He looked incredibly handsome and utterly invincible. Sitting at the front table, looking up at him with sickening adoration, was his young mistress, Chloe. She wore a tight red dress, and the stolen diamond tennis bracelet gleamed on her wrist. Beside her sat my mother-in-law, Brenda, wearing a smug smile of supreme victory. "I want to thank all of you for believing in my vision," Bradley announced. "This property represents the pinnacle of modern real estate development, but I could not have built this empire alone. I want to raise my glass to the incredible team at my brokerage. And most importantly, I want to dedicate this monumental evening to my beautiful future wife, Chloe." The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Bradley smiled warmly down at Chloe, who blushed and raised her glass in return. The breathtaking audacity of his lie made my blood run cold. He was publicly proposing to his accomplice, while legally still married to the woman he intended to leave penniless. I signaled for my guards to remain at the edge of the crowd. I walked purposefully around the perimeter, keeping to the shadows, until I reached the elevated soundboard and lighting control station. A young technician, wearing a black headset, sat behind the console, sliding various audio levels. He looked up in confusion as I approached. "Ma'am, you are not allowed back here," he whispered frantically, trying to wave me away. I did not stop. I stepped directly into his personal space, radiating the unyielding authority of an elite forensic accountant. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a silver USB drive. It held the fake shell company registrations, the forged tax documents, and the stolen wire transfers. I placed the drive onto his soundboard with a heavy, definitive click. "Play the video file on this drive right now," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. The young man hesitated, his hands hovering over the controls. "I do not work for you," he stammered. "I cannot interrupt the presentation." I looked him dead in the eye and delivered my final ultimatum. "You are currently operating the audiovisual equipment for a criminal enterprise funded by stolen federal money. Play this or you go to jail as an accomplice." The technician turned pale. He snatched the silver drive with trembling fingers and jammed it into the main computer terminal. He clicked the single video file sitting on the desktop. The transition was instantaneous and spectacularly violent. Bradley was still smiling, holding his microphone, preparing to deliver another arrogant toast. Suddenly, the soft classical background music was completely severed. A harsh electronic hum buzzed loudly through the massive speakers. The giant digital projection screen behind the stage flickered wildly. The polished corporate logo of his real estate firm vanished entirely. In its place, a massive high-definition image of a forged Internal Revenue Service tax document illuminated the entire ballroom. The sudden change was jarring. The crowd gasped collectively, their applause dying instantly in their throats. Bradley frowned in confusion, turning around to look at the screen. He expected to see a rendering of his next building project. Instead, he saw his own fraudulent signature blown up to 10 feet tall. The screen automatically transitioned to the next slide. It displayed a brightly colored spreadsheet. The columns were unmistakably clear, showing massive amounts of earnest money deposits being siphoned directly from innocent client escrow accounts. The destination for every single stolen dollar was listed boldly in red ink: Horizon Holdings Limited Liability Company. The sole registered owner was clearly displayed as Chloe Jones. A heavy, chilling silence crashed down upon the extravagant ballroom. The wealthy investors in the crowd began to murmur, pointing at the screen in absolute horror. They recognized their own names and their own missing money displayed on the evidence slides. The illusion of the successful titan of industry shattered into a million irreparable pieces in a matter of seconds. Bradley dropped his microphone. The heavy piece of metal hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, piercing screech of feedback that made several guests cover their ears. His face drained of all color, transforming into a mask of pure terror. He looked out into the chaotic crowd, desperately searching for the source of the sabotage. His frantic eyes scanned the room until they finally found me standing perfectly still near the soundboard. I stood tall and unyielding in my powerful navy suit. I did not offer him a tearful plea. I offered him a cold, merciless smile of absolute victory. The crash of his fake empire was finally complete. Everything he had stolen and every lie he had ever told was now fully exposed to the bright, unforgiving light of reality. The crystal chandeliers, suspended from the vaulted ceiling, cast a warm golden glow over the sea of oblivious guests. Laughter and the light clinking of expensive champagne flutes created a symphony of fabricated success. I stood completely still in the cool shadows near the audiovisual control console, my $4,000 navy suit acting as an impenetrable armor against the ghosts of my past. On the grand stage at the far end of the ballroom, Bradley was the picture of a conquering king. He held his microphone with a relaxed, arrogant grip, flashing that perfectly practiced smile that had deceived me for 8 long years. He was in the middle of thanking his elite commercial investors, spinning a magnificent web of lies about vision dedication and unparalleled market growth. Down in the front row, his mother Brenda was beaming with toxic pride, while his mistress Chloe sat dripping in diamonds, practically vibrating with the thrill of her stolen victory. They were all entirely intoxicated by the illusion of their own grandeur. I gave the terrified soundboard technician a final, unyielding look. His trembling finger hovered over the computer mouse for a fraction of a second before he finally clicked the execution command. The transition was instantaneous and spectacularly violent. The soft, elegant classical music that had been floating through the ballroom was abruptly severed, replaced by a harsh, grating electronic hum that buzzed loudly through the massive surround sound speakers. The colossal digital projection screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the polished, fake corporate logo of his real estate firm, flickered wildly. A collective gasp rippled through the affluent crowd as the blinding white light of a new image illuminated the entire room. It was not a rendering of a future skyscraper or a chart of projected profits. It was a massive, high-resolution scan of a forged federal tax return. The document towered 10 feet tall, exposing every fraudulent line item and most damning of all, the perfect replication of my personal signature that Bradley had meticulously forged to shift his massive corporate liabilities onto my social security number. Bradley faltered, his confident smile instantly freezing. He turned around, squinting against the harsh glare of the projector, expecting to see a simple technical glitch. Instead, he came face to face with his own federal crime. The color drained entirely from his handsome face, leaving behind a sickly ashen gray. Before he could even formulate a word, the screen transitioned to the next slide with a sharp, definitive click. Now a brilliantly colored, ruthlessly organized spreadsheet dominated the stage. As an elite forensics accountant, I knew exactly how to make financial data impossible to misunderstand. The columns were unmistakably clear, highlighting massive amounts of earnest money deposits being siphoned directly from innocent client escrow accounts. The destination for every single stolen dollar was listed boldly in bright red ink, pointing directly to a limited liability company named Horizon Holdings. Right beneath that, the official state registration document for the shell company was displayed clearly, identifying Chloe as the sole managing member and registered agent. The heavy, chilling silence that crashed down upon the extravagant ballroom was absolute. The wealthy investors, local politicians, and prominent church members began to murmur, pointing at the glowing screen in absolute horror. They recognized their own names, their own companies, and their own missing money displayed on the undeniable evidence slides. The illusion of the successful titan of industry shattered into a million irreparable pieces in a matter of seconds. I stepped out of the shadows and walked purposefully into the harsh, bright light of the stage. My stiletto heels clicked sharply against the polished hardwood floor, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of impending justice. I did not rush. I walked with the supreme, unshakable confidence of a woman who held the absolute power of truth in her hands. I bypassed the stunned security guards and walked straight to the podium. Bradley was paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, his arrogant facade completely obliterated by pure, unadulterated terror. I reached out and smoothly took a secondary microphone from the microphone stand. I turned to face the chaotic, murmuring crowd. I did not yell, and I did not cry. I spoke with a calm, surgical precision that cut through the noise of the ballroom like a razor-sharp blade. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice echoing clearly and powerfully across the vast space. The property you are standing in wasn't bought with profits. It was bought with your stolen escrow deposits. And Bradley's future wife is the sole owner of the shell company holding your money. The ballroom erupted into sheer chaos. The polite, wealthy guests transformed instantly into an angry, betrayed mob. Investors started screaming, their faces red with fury, as they realized they had been funding a massive Ponzi scheme. They threw their champagne glasses onto the floor, demanding immediate answers. Brenda jumped up from her front row seat, clutching her pearl necklace, her face contorted in a mask of total shock and denial. She looked at her son, then at me, her pious arrogance melting into pathetic, trembling disbelief. Chloe, realizing she was now legally framed as the mastermind of a multi-million-dollar federal fraud, let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She stood up, her chair crashing backward, and looked at the giant screen displaying her name next to the stolen funds. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist suddenly looked like a pair of glittering handcuffs. She turned to Bradley, her eyes wide with a horrific realization that she had been used as the ultimate scapegoat. Bradley dropped his microphone. It hit the stage floor with a loud, screeching pop of feedback. His entire empire, built on lies, forged signatures, and financial abuse, had burned to the ground. The execution was flawless, and the absolute real consequences were finally arriving. My elaborate trap was now officially shut. He was completely and utterly destroyed, ruined forever. The paralyzing silence that had gripped the grand ballroom shattered into a million jagged pieces. It was replaced by a deafening roar of absolute outrage. The affluent investors, who just moments ago had been raising expensive crystal flutes to toast. My husband now surged forward like a tidal wave of fury. Highly respected commercial developers and local politicians abandoned all their refined social graces. They shouted over one another, pointing aggressively at the towering digital projection of the forged tax returns and the stolen escrow transfers. The pristine illusion of Bradley and his unstoppable real estate empire had been incinerated in the span of 30 seconds. Bradley stood completely frozen on the wooden stage. The heavy microphone lay forgotten at his feet, emitting a low, irritating hum. He raised his hands in a frantic, desperate attempt to calm the rioting crowd, but his charismatic voice was entirely swallowed by the cacophony of betrayal. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had permanently snapped shut. Down in the front row, The reality of the evidence was finally penetrating Chloe and her desperate ambition. She stared at the massive spreadsheet illuminating the dark room. Her blonde hair fell messily around her shoulders as she read her own name, explicitly listed as the sole owner of Horizon Holdings. The shell company holding millions of dollars in stolen federal money was legally hers. The young mistress realized with a horrifying clarity that Bradley had not been preparing to make her his beloved wife and share a life of endless luxury. He had been meticulously setting her up to take the ultimate fall for a massive financial crime. He needed a naive scapegoat, and she had walked willingly into his snare, blinded by shiny gifts and hollow promises. A guttural, hysterical shriek tore from Chloe as she scrambled out of her chair. She hiked up her expensive red designer dress and charged up the short steps to the stage. Bradley turned toward her, instinctively reaching out to calm her down. Chloe did not hesitate. She swung her arm with every ounce of terrifying rage she possessed and slapped Bradley directly across the face. The sharp, explosive crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed clearly, even over the screaming crowd. "You ruined my life," she wailed, her voice breaking into an ugly, frantic sob. "You set me up. You used me to steal their money, and you put my name on the accounts. You told me you loved me, but you were just building me a prison cell." Bradley stumbled backward, clutching his rapidly swelling cheek. He opened his mouth to deny her accusations, but the irrefutable proof was still glowing 10 feet tall right behind him. At the base of the stage, the fallout was claiming its next victim. Brenda, my former mother-in-law, had built her entire identity on pious superiority and the arrogant boasting of her son and his immense success. Now she was surrounded by the furious faces of her fellow church council members, who had personally invested in his fraudulent commercial fund. Brenda clutched her string of heavy pearls so tightly the strand looked ready to snap. Her face turned a sickly pale shade of gray. The social standing she guarded with such vicious cruelty was completely eradicated. She let out a long, dramatic wail of profound misery and collapsed heavily into her padded banquet chair, covering her face with trembling hands as her former friends turned their disgusted backs on her. Then the heavy oak double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with a booming, authoritative crash. The chaotic shouting in the room instantly died down, replaced by a tense, terrified hush. A dozen men and women wearing dark tactical jackets with bright yellow letters spelling Internal Revenue Service and police marched into the extravagant space. Their expressions were stern and unyielding. The crowd of wealthy investors immediately parted, forming a wide, clear path for the federal authorities. The lead federal agent walked purposefully down the center aisle, stepping over discarded napkins and spilled champagne. He marched directly up the stage steps. Bradley did not try to run or offer any of his usual smooth-talking excuses. There was absolutely nowhere left to go and no one left to manipulate. The agent grabbed Bradley firmly by the shoulder, spinning him around to face the devastating reality of his actions. "Bradley Thompson, you are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and the operation of an illegal financial enterprise," the agent stated, his voice projecting a cold, uncompromising authority. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around my husband and his wrists was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. The man who had mocked my thrifted clothes, who had forged my signature to frame me for his crimes, and who had arrogantly promised that I would die broke, was now weeping openly. His broad shoulders shook with pathetic, racking sobs. The local police officers also moved in to secure Chloe, who was still crying hysterically on the stage floor, realizing her stolen diamond bracelet would soon be traded for federal handcuffs. The agents turned Bradley around and began to escort him off the stage, leading him down the main aisle toward the exit. The entire town watched in absolute silence as the fake titan of industry was paraded through the room like a common thief. I stood perfectly still near the soundboard wearing my immaculate $4,000 Navy suit. As the agents escorted him down the aisle, their path brought him directly past me. Bradley lifted his tear-stained face. Our eyes met. The sheer hatred and terror in his gaze was intoxicating. He slowed his pace for a fraction of a second, staring at the woman he thought he had starved out and discarded. I took one slow, deliberate step forward, closing the final distance between us. I did not raise my voice. I leaned in close, ensuring only he could hear the final nail being driven into his coffin. "By the way, Bradley," I whispered, my tone dripping with a smooth, icy satisfaction. "My freelance consulting firm netted exactly $740,000 this year. But do not worry about asking for your marital share. You will not see a single dime of it. Have a truly great time in federal prison." The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. His eyes widened in absolute shock, and his knees visibly buckled beneath him. The federal agents had to physically hoist him up by his arms, dragging his limp, shaking body out through the grand glass doors and into the waiting, flashing lights of the police cruisers. The room remained completely silent. Long after the flashing red and blue lights disappeared down the long driveway, the investors began to gather their belongings quietly, whispering among themselves about the incredible deception they had just witnessed. I did not stay to comfort them or offer any explanations. I turned away from the empty stage and walked toward the side exit. My stiletto heels clicked rhythmically against the polished floor, carrying me out of the suffocating ballroom and into the cool, refreshing night air. The heavy burden I had carried for 8 long years was finally lifted from my shoulders, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated freedom. The morning sun pours through the newly installed French windows of my beautifully renovated home office, casting a warm golden glow across the pristine mahogany desk. It has been exactly 6 months since the night the projector screen in that lavish ballroom shattered the grand illusion of my marriage. I sit in my ergonomic leather chair, bringing a porcelain mug of freshly brewed black coffee to my lips, and simply breathe. The bitter, rich taste grounds me in a reality that finally belongs entirely to me. For 8 years, I existed as a shadow in this very house, playing the role of the humble penny-pinching church bookkeeper who wore faded sweaters and drove a rattling sedan. Now looking around at the custom-built bookshelves and the framed certifications on the wall, I am fully realized. I am Sarah, a 34-year-old elite forensic accountant, and the shadows have been permanently banished by the blinding light of truth. The suffocating anxiety that used to tightly grip my chest every time the front door opened is completely gone. In its place is a profound, unshakable peace. The storm has passed, leaving behind a clean slate wiped entirely free of the parasites who tried to bleed me dry. The wheels of federal justice grind exceedingly slow, but they grind with absolute and terrifying certainty. Bradley learned this harsh lesson in the most devastating way possible. When the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation finished dissecting the meticulously organized binders of evidence I provided, they uncovered a financial crime syndicate far deeper than even I had initially projected. Faced with mountains of forged tax returns, illegal wire transfers, and stolen commercial escrow deposits, his high-priced defense attorneys advised him to surrender. Bradley pled guilty to multiple felony counts of wire fraud and severe tax evasion. The arrogant titan of real estate, the man who wore custom silk ties and loudly boasted to his wealthy friends that I would die broke, stood before a federal judge looking completely hollowed out. I sat in the back row of the courtroom on the day of his sentencing, watching the realization finally crush his massive ego. The judge showed absolutely no mercy to a man who stole from innocent investors and attempted to frame his own wife for federal crimes. He received a definitive 7-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There will be no fine dining or tailored suits where he's going, only the harsh daily reminder of his spectacular downfall. As for his young accomplice, the universe delivered a brilliantly poetic dose of karma when federal agents raided the shell company registered in her name. The glamorous fantasy world Chloe thought she had secured instantly evaporated. Realizing she was staring down the barrel of a decade behind bars for receiving stolen funds and participating in a massive Ponzi scheme, her fierce loyalty to my husband vanished overnight. She immediately turned state's evidence testifying against Bradley to avoid a prison sentence. The prosecutors granted her a plea deal to keep her out of a federal cell, but the Internal Revenue Service was significantly less forgiving. They slapped her with hundreds of thousands of dollars in severe financial penalties and restitution orders. The luxury apartments, the designer dresses, and that infamous diamond tennis bracelet were all confiscated to pay back the victims. Today, the woman who once cornered me in a church kitchen to offer me $20 out of fake pity is currently working the graveyard shift at a local fast food drive-thru just to make her minimum monthly penalty payments. The collateral damage of the scandal completely dismantled the toxic matriarch of the family as well. For decades, my mother-in-law Brenda had ruled our local community church with an iron fist, using her pious reputation as a weapon to belittle my modest background. But there is nothing a tight-knit conservative congregation despises more than a highly public multi-million-dollar criminal scandal. When the explosive details of Bradley fraud and his sordid affair hit the local news networks, the social fallout was absolute and immediate. The very church elders she used to gossip with completely shunned her. She was quietly but firmly asked to step down from the parish council and the Sunday school committee. Unable to bear the heavy judgmental stares at the grocery store or the total isolation from her former friends, she packed her bags and quietly moved out of state. She now lives in a tiny apartment hundreds of miles away, stripped of the unearned pride and community standing she valued above all else. She lost her golden child, her prestigious reputation, and the comfortable retirement she wrongly assumed she could steal from my inherited home. As I finish my coffee, I look down at my hands. They are steady and strong. The divorce was finalized rapidly, heavily expedited by the mountain of criminal evidence. Because I had transferred my wealth into an offshore account and placed my home into a revocable trust, I retained 100% of my assets. The fraudulent home equity line was voided by the bank, leaving my property untouched. I took immense personal pleasure in standing before a judge and officially dropping Bradley's last name, severing the final tie to that chapter of my life. Now sitting in the sanctuary of my home office, I open my laptop to begin the workday. My freelance forensic accounting business is booming. The corporate audit contracts are flowing in faster than I can process them, driven by the elite reputation I built in the shadows. I survived the ultimate betrayal by utilizing my intellect and my relentless demand for justice. I did not just survive the fire my husband ignited to destroy me. I walked straight through the flames, forged myself into something completely unbreakable, and burned his entire kingdom to the ground. I want to take a moment to look through this screen and speak to you not just as the woman who survived this nightmare, but as a friend who understands the heavy weight of betrayal. We are taught from a very young age to be the glue that holds our families together. We are told that marriage is about sacrifice, about standing by your man through thick and thin, about pouring every ounce of your energy into building a shared dream. I poured 8 years of my youth and my hard-earned money into an illusion. I wore thrifted clothes and drove an old rattling car because I believed I was investing in our future. I believed that love meant giving until it hurt. But what I learned in the most brutal way possible is that when you give everything to someone who only knows how to take you, will inevitably be left with nothing but an empty shell. Many of us, especially women who have spent decades building a life with a partner, fall into the dangerous trap of blind trust. We let them handle the complicated finances. We sign the tax returns. They slide across the dinner table, and we ignore the quiet alarms going off in our minds when the numbers simply do not add up. We make excuses for their reckless spending or their sudden need for privacy. We tell ourselves that they are just under a lot of pressure at work. We confused emotional manipulation with ambitious drive. I excused my husband's constant financial disasters because I thought my unwavering support would eventually fix him. I thought my love could cure his overwhelming greed. I was wrong. You cannot fix a man who actively views your loyalty as a weakness to be exploited. If there is one profound truth I want you to take away from my journey, it is that financial abuse is just as violent and destructive as any other form of domestic betrayal. It starts quietly. A diverted bank statement here, a newly opened credit card. There a supposedly standard business waiver that requires your immediate signature. They isolate you from your own resources to ensure that when they finally decide to discard you, you will not have the means to fight back. My husband orchestrated a scenario where I would be left completely destitute, drowning in his massive federal tax liabilities, while he flew off to a tropical paradise with a woman a decade my junior. He weaponized my pristine credit score and my unconditional love, turning my own inherited family home into a loaded gun pointed directly at my future. But here is the beautiful, undeniable reality that every woman needs to hear today. You are exponentially stronger than the man who is trying to break you. When you are pushed to the absolute edge, when you are staring down the barrel of total ruin, a dormant survival instinct awakens inside of you. I remember collapsing on my kitchen floor, performing the role of the shattered, heartbroken housewife, because I knew it was exactly what his inflated ego needed to see. In that moment, I realized that true power does not come from screaming or throwing plates. True power comes from cold, calculated, and absolute silence. It comes from wiping your tears standing up and turning your grief into a flawless strategic operation. You do not have to be an elite forensic accountant to take back control of your life. You just have to be willing to open your eyes and finally look at the cold, hard facts. Reclaiming your life begins with reclaiming your financial literacy. Do not ever apologize for asking to see the bank statements. Do not ever feel guilty for refusing to sign a document you have not thoroughly read or consulted an attorney about. Your signature is your most valuable asset, and it must be fiercely protected. I built a shadow business and saved hundreds of thousands of dollars because I finally recognized that my marriage was not a partnership but a sinking ship. Having a secret safety net gave me the absolute freedom to dismantle his criminal empire without the fear of starvation. Money is not just currency, it is choices. It is the ability to hire a ruthless lawyer, the power to secure a private residence, and the ultimate armor against a man who threatens that you will die broke. Life on the other side of a toxic marriage is incredibly beautiful. The air in my home is no longer thick with anxiety and endless lies. I wake up every morning in a beautifully renovated house that belongs entirely to me. I drink my coffee in total peace, knowing that my hard-earned money is safe and that my future is completely secure. The fear that used to paralyze me has been replaced by a deep, radiating pride. The man who tried to destroy me is sitting in a federal prison cell, facing the reality of his own catastrophic arrogance. The people who aided in my attempted downfall have been swept away by the swift hand of justice. I did not just survive the fire my husband deliberately set. I walked straight through the flames and built an empire out of the ashes. Ladies, a marriage should be a partnership, not a parasitic drain. Never let a man's ego blind you to the reality of his actions, and always know exactly what is happening with your finances. True love requires transparency, not forged signatures. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories of surviving and thriving, and leave a comment below, telling me what state are you watching from and what time is it where you are right now. Stay strong, know your worth, and I'll see you in the next